Rain hammered Seattle like bullets against glass the night Kyle Viro discovered the woman bleeding in his kitchen wasn't who she claimed to be. For 9 months, she'd worked inside his fortress mansion under a false name. Now she lay beneath the amber stove light, with bruises shaped like fingerprints around her throat, and a folded note beside her trembling hand. "You built the cage she grew up in." The billionaire construction magnate stared at those words and felt something crack open inside him, something 12 years of wealth and carefully buried silence had kept locked away. Because Kyle Viro wasn't just rich, he was complicit. And the past he thought he'd escaped had just walked back into his life, bleeding and unforgiving, with a truth that could destroy everything he'd built. If you want to see how far this story reaches, drop a comment with your city below, hit that like button, and follow along until the very end. Sports. The security footage went dark at exactly 11:48 p.m. Kyle stood in his office on the third floor, staring at the wall of monitors that normally showed every angle of the estate. Front gates, perimeter walls, the long driveway cutting through manicured hedges, interior hallways lined with original artwork worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. 23 cameras. Motion sensors buried beneath the lawn. Pressure plates hidden in the marble foyer. All of it useless. 6 minutes of pure black. No static. No error codes. Just darkness swallowing the feeds whole before spitting them back out like nothing had happened. Kyle's jaw tightened. He reached for his phone, fingers hovering over the contact labeled Security Chief, but something stopped him. A flicker of instinct. The kind that had kept him alive in rooms where other men had walked in breathing and left as memories. He moved toward the hallway instead. The mansion stretched around him in cathedral silence. Vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Washington Park's blackened tree line, polished hardwood that caught the glow from recessed lighting like still water. It was the kind of place that whispered money so loudly it didn't need to scream. But tonight, the silence felt different. Wrong. Kale descended the main staircase, one hand trailing along the banister, the other tucked inside his jacket pocket where he kept a compact Glock he'd never fired but always carried. Old habits. The kind that survived even after you convinced yourself you'd left that world behind. The kitchen light bled into the hallway before he reached it, warm amber against cold white walls. He rounded the corner and stopped. Mrs. Hale lay sprawled across the marble floor beneath the stove light she always left burning when she worked late. Her gray uniform hung torn at the shoulder. Dark bruises bloomed around her throat in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. Blood streaked from her split lip onto the tile, pooling near her outstretched hand. And beside that hand, folded neatly like a dinner invitation, rested a single piece of paper. Kale moved without thinking, crossing the kitchen in 4 strides and dropping to one knee beside her. She was breathing, shallow, uneven, but alive. Her eyes cracked open when his shadow fell over her, wide and glassy with shock. "Don't move," Kyle said, already pulling his phone out. "I'm calling. No." Her voice came out hoarse, barely louder than the rain hammering against the windows. "No police. You need a hospital." "No." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, fingers digging into his skin. "No hospital. No police." Kyle stared at her. In 9 months of employment, Mrs. Hale had been professional to the point of invisibility. Efficient, quiet, the kind of person who moved through the mansion like a ghost, leaving behind perfectly arranged rooms and meals that appeared without fanfare. He didn't know her birthday, didn't know if she had family, didn't know anything beyond the background check his security team had run before hiring her, but he knew fear when he saw it. And this wasn't fear of whoever had hurt her. This was fear of him. "Who did this?" Kyle asked quietly. She didn't answer, just stared at him with those wide, glassy eyes, her breathing shallow and ragged. Kale's gaze dropped to the folded note beside her hand. He reached for it slowly, unfolding the paper with careful fingers. The message inside was handwritten in black ink, each letter precise and deliberate. "You built the cage she grew up in." The words landed like a punch to the sternum. Kyle read it twice, then a third time, trying to force sense into the sentence, searching for context that refused to appear. His mind spun through possibilities: extortion, revenge, mistaken identity. But none of them fit. The note wasn't a threat. It was an accusation. "What does this mean?"
he asked, still holding the paper. Mrs. Hale closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, cutting through the blood. You don't remember me, do you?
The question hit harder than the note. Kyl's hand tightened around the paper. He studied her face, really looked at her for the first time since she'd started working for him. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Olive skin, high cheekbones. Features that could have been striking if they weren't so carefully neutral, so deliberately forgettable. No, he admitted. She laughed. It came out wet and broken, more like a cough than humor. Of course you don't. Kyle felt something cold settle in his chest. He straightened slowly, the note still clutched in his hand, and took a step back. His mind was already working through the implications, cataloging threats, calculating risks. But beneath the tactical analysis, something deeper stirred. Something he'd spent 12 years learning how to ignore. Guilt. Tell me what this means, he said again, quieter this time. Mrs. Hale pushed herself up onto her elbows, wincing as the movement pulled at bruised ribs. She looked at him with eyes that held too much history, too much weight. My real name is Seraphine Vale. The name meant nothing to him. 13 years ago, she continued, voice steady despite the pain etched across her face, I was trafficked through a warehouse system in Tacoma, one of the logistics hubs your company used before you rebranded, before you became legitimate. The air left Kyl's lungs. She kept talking. I was 13 years old. They kept us behind a false wall in the basement while executives held meetings upstairs. I remember you coming through once. You wore a gray suit. You were signing shipping manifests at a desk near the window. You looked bored. Kyle didn't move. Couldn't move. I remember thinking, Seraphine said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, that our lives weighed nothing to you, less than nothing. We were inventory. The kitchen blurred at the edges of Kyl's vision. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, to think past the roaring in his ears. That was a long time ago, he heard himself say. The words sounded hollow even to him. Not long enough. Seraphine sat up fully now, ignoring the blood on her uniform, the bruises darkening her skin. She looked at him with terrible clarity. I spent 9 months working inside this house, she said, watching you, studying the man who helped build the machine that destroyed my childhood. Do you know what I expected to find? Kyle said nothing. A monster, Seraphine finished. I expected to find a monster, someone cruel, someone who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care. And I found something worse. She stood slowly, using the counter for support. I found a man who convinced himself he'd changed without ever facing what he'd done. A man who built a fortune on top of buried bodies and called it success. A man who sleeps in a mansion paid for with blood and tells himself his hands are clean. The accusation cut deeper than any blade. Kale's throat tightened. If you wanted revenge, there are easier ways than getting a job scrubbing floors. I didn't want revenge. Then what? I wanted to see if you were worth saving. The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. Before Kyle could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out automatically, half his attention still locked on Seraphine, the other half struggling to process what she'd just said. The message on screen was brief. Unknown number, tomorrow. 8 p.m. Alki Beach. Come alone. Kale stared at the text. No signature, no context, just coordinates disguised as an invitation. What is it? Seraphine asked. He showed her the screen. Her face went pale. That's him, she whispered. Him who? Lucien Dragor. The name detonated in Kyle's memory like a landmine he'd spent 12 years trying to forget. Lucien Dragor, former logistics architect of the Pacific Corridor Network. The man who had turned trafficking routes into spreadsheets, human cargo into profit margins, children into commodities. Elegant, patient, ruthless. A predator who wore tailored suits and smiled like he knew every secret you'd ever buried. Kyle had worked with him once, had taken orders from him, had signed documents that authorized shipments. He never questioned because asking questions meant looking too closely at the machine feeding his bank account. How do you know he sent this? Kyle asked, his voice tight. Seraphine touched the bruises on her throat. Because he's the one who did this. He broke into your house tonight. He knew exactly where the cameras were, exactly how long he had before your security system rebooted. He wanted me to deliver that note, wanted you to know he's back. Why? Because the network is returning. The words dropped like stones into deep water. Cale felt his pulse hammering in his temples. That's impossible. The corridor collapsed years ago. Federal raids, arrests, the entire infrastructure. Rebuilt. Seraphine cut him off. Bigger, smarter, protected by people with enough money and power to make the old operation look like small-time street crime. How do you know this? Because I've been tracking them for 3 years. Ever since I aged out of the system and realized no one else was going to stop them. She met his eyes. And because Lucien told me himself before he choked me unconscious in your kitchen. He wanted me to understand what was coming, wanted me to see the look on your face when you realized you never really escaped. Kael's hands curled into fists. What does he want? You. The single word carried the weight of inevitability. Your port infrastructure, Seraphine continued. Your shipping contracts. Your political connections. Everything you built after the corridor collapsed. He wants it reopened, repurposed, and if you refuse, she didn't need to finish. Kyle looked down at the note still clutched in his hand. You built the cage she grew up in. The past wasn't just returning. It was demanding payment, with interest. I need to make a call, he said. To who? Someone who can help. There's no one who can help with this. You don't know that. Seraphine laughed bitterly. I know exactly how this works. I've lived it. You think your lawyers or your security team or your money can protect you from Lucien? And he owns people like that. He is people like that. The only difference between him and you is he never bothered pretending to be clean. The accusation landed like a slap. Cale forced himself to breathe, to think, to move past the panic clawing at his chest. Then what do you suggest? He asked quietly. Seraphine wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. You go to that meeting tomorrow night. You listen to what he wants. And then you decide whether you're still the man who looked bored while children disappeared beneath your feet, or whether you've actually changed. And if I haven't, then I hope he destroys you. The honesty in her voice was more terrifying than any threat. Cale stood there as the amber kitchen light, surrounded by marble and blood and the wreckage of carefully constructed denial, and realized something fundamental had shifted. The walls he'd built around his past were crumbling, and there was no one coming to save him, because the enemy threatening him now wasn't a person. It was the truth. The rain hadn't stopped by the time Kyle reached his office on the 3rd floor. He poured 3 fingers of scotch into a crystal tumbler and stood at the window overlooking Washington Park, watching rain distort the city lights into abstract smears of color. Behind him, Seraphine had refused medical attention, refused to leave the estate, refused everything except a hot shower and a change of clothes. She was in the guest room now, probably not sleeping, probably staring at the ceiling and wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. Kyle drained half the scotch in one swallow. His phone sat on the desk, the message from Lucien still glowing on the screen like a brand. He should call his security chief, should activate lockdown protocols, should contact his lawyers and start building a defensive wall of legal protection thick enough to survive whatever storm was coming. But Seraphine's words kept echoing in his skull. You convinced yourself you'd changed without ever facing what you'd done. The scotch turned sour in his mouth. Cale set the glass down and pulled up his contacts, scrolling past names of politicians, developers, contractors, fixers, the entire ecosystem of power and influence he'd cultivated over 12 years of legitimate business. His thumb hovered over Marcus Chen, security chief, then moved past it. He dialed a different number instead. It rang 4 times before connecting. Cale? The voice on the other end was rough with sleep. It's almost 1 in the morning. This better be... I need everything you have on Lucien Dragor. Silence stretched across the line. Jesus Christ, Marcus finally said. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Why are you asking about him? He contacted me, wants a meeting. When? Tomorrow night. Marcus exhaled slowly. Don't go. Not an option. Then you're an idiot. Probably. Another pause. Cale could hear Marcus moving, heard the rustle of blankets, footsteps on hardwood. Lucien Dragor disappeared from federal radar 7 years ago. Marcus said, his tone shifting into the clipped efficiency of a former Marine briefing an officer. Last confirmed sighting was in Singapore. Before that, he'd been operating out of Eastern Europe, helping reorganize trafficking infrastructure after the corridor raids. Word was he'd gone legit, consulting for private security firms, advising governments on counter-trafficking measures. Poacher turned gamekeeper. You believe that? No. Neither do I. What does he want? Kael hesitated. How much to tell? How much to admit? My infrastructure, he said finally. He wants me to reopen certain channels for import operations. The euphemism hung heavy. And if you refuse? Marcus asked. He burns me. How? Old records, federal evidence, everything that ties me to the original network. Marcus didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. Does he actually have that? Probably. Then you're fucked. I know. So why are you calling me instead of a lawyer? Kael looked out at the rain-soaked city, at the glittering skyline he'd helped build with money he'd never questioned the source of, at the empire standing on foundations he'd spent 12 years refusing to examine. Because I don't know if I want to fight this. The confession felt like stepping off a cliff. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. You realize what you're saying? He finally asked. Yeah. You realize what happens if you don't fight? Your company collapses, your assets freeze, your reputation? I know. Then what the hell are you talking about? Kael closed his eyes. There's a woman in my guest room right now. Her name is Seraphine Vale. 13 years ago, she was trafficked through one of the warehouse systems I helped operate. She's been working in my house for 9 months under a false identity, watching me, waiting to see if I was worth saving. He paused. Tonight, Lucien broke into my home and beat her unconscious just to send me a message. Silence. Christ, Marcus breathed. So when you ask what I'm talking about, Kael continued, I'm talking about whether I keep running from what I did or whether I finally face it. Whether I keep hiding behind lawyers and money and 12 years of distance, or whether I actually do something that matters. Like what? I don't know yet. Marcus exhaled slowly. This is a bad idea, Kael. A really bad idea. Probably. You could lose everything. I know. And it might not even matter. Guys like Lucien don't go down easy. Even if you cooperate with the feds, even if you burn your entire empire to the ground trying to stop him, he might still walk away clean. I know that too. Another pause. You're serious about this, Marcus said quietly. Yeah. Then you need to understand something. If you go to war with Lucien Dragor, it won't be clean, it won't be noble, it'll be ugly and brutal, and there's a good chance you don't survive it. Not literally, maybe, but everything you've built, everything you've become, it all burns. I understand. Do you? Marcus's voice sharpened. Because I've known you for 8 years, Kael. You're a lot of things. Smart, ruthless, pragmatic. But suicidal? That's new. Kael opened his eyes and stared at his reflection in the rain-streaked window. The man staring back looked tired. Older than his 43 years, hollowed out by wealth that had never filled the spaces inside him. Maybe I'm just tired of running, he said. Marcus sighed. All right. I'll pull everything I can find on Dragor by morning. Recent activity, known associates, financial patterns. But Kael? Yeah? Think hard about this, really hard, because once you start down this road, there's no coming back. The line went dead. Kael set the phone down and picked up his scotch, draining the rest in one long swallow that burned all the way down. Outside, rain continued hammering the city like it was trying to wash something clean that could never be clean again. He thought about Seraphine in the guest room, about the bruises on her throat and the weight in her eyes when she looked at him. About the years she'd lost to a machine he'd helped build. About all the other children whose names he'd never know, whose faces he'd never see, whose lives had been ground up and discarded by systems he'd authorized with board signatures on logistics forms. And he thought about Lucien Dragor waiting somewhere in the rain-soaked dark, smiling that blade-sharp smile, knowing exactly how this game would end. Kael poured another scotch. Then he pulled up his laptop and started searching through old files he'd promised himself he would never look at again. Morning came gray and cold. Kyle hadn't slept. He'd spent the night digging through encrypted drives and password-protected folders, excavating the buried architecture of his past. Shipping manifests, financial transfers, coded correspondence, everything organized and preserved by a younger version of himself, who'd been smart enough to understand that insurance came in many forms. By sunrise, he had a clearer picture of what he was facing. The old Pacific Corridor network had moved approximately $14 million through Kyle's logistics infrastructure over a 3-year period, most of it hidden in construction supply shipments, equipment transfers, and international contractor payments, clean on paper, toxic beneath the surface. And Lucian Dragor had orchestrated every dollar. If those records went public, federal prosecutors would have enough to bury Kyle for the rest of his life. Asset forfeiture, racketeering, material support for human trafficking operations. The charges would stack like bodies in a mass grave. But the records could also bury Lucian, and that created leverage. Kyle leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. His office smelled like stale scotch and desperation. Coffee would help. Maybe. He found Seraphine in the kitchen, already dressed in jeans and a borrowed sweater that hung loose on her frame. She was making coffee, moving with the careful efficiency of someone working through pain. "You should be resting," Kyle said. "Should I?" She didn't look at him, just poured coffee into 2 mugs and slid one across the marble counter. "Or should I be packing? Getting out before Lucien decides to finish what he started?" Kyle took the mug. The coffee was black and bitter. "You're not going anywhere." "Why not?" "Because you're safer here than anywhere else." Seraphine laughed. It came out sharp and humorless. "Right, because your security system worked so well last night." The accusation stung because it was accurate. "Marcus is coming by this morning," Kyle said. "He's upgrading the entire network. No more blind spots." "You really think better cameras will stop Lucia?" "And?" "No, but they'll slow him down." Seraphine finally looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but the clarity behind them hadn't diminished. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to the meeting." "And then?" "I don't know yet." "That's not good enough." "It's all I have." Seraphine set her mug down with a sharp clink. "Let me be very clear about something, KL. I didn't survive 13 years of hell just to watch you make a deal with the same people who put me there. If you're planning to reopen those routes, if you're planning to give Lucien what he wants so you can keep your empire intact, I'm not." The words came out harder than he intended. Seraphine studied him, searching for lies. "Then what?" she pressed. Kale took a breath. "I'm going to destroy it. All of it. The infrastructure, the connections, the buried evidence, everything. Including yourself? If that's what it takes." The kitchen fell silent except for rain still drumming against the windows. Seraphine kept staring at him like she was trying to see through walls he'd spent 12 years building. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why now? Why me?" "Because you asked if I was worth saving," Kyle said quietly. "And I don't know the answer, but I need to find out." Something shifted in Seraphine's expression. Not trust, not forgiveness, but something fragile and tentative. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. "Lucien won't let you walk away," she said. "You understand that, right? Even if you destroy everything, even if you burn your entire empire to the ground, he'll come after you. He doesn't forgive betrayal." "I know. And the people backing him, the new network, they're not going to just disappear because you expose them. They're too big, too protected." "I know that too." "Then you're going to die for nothing." Kyle met her eyes. "Maybe. But at least I'll die trying to do something that actually matters instead of hiding behind money and silence for another 12 years. Seraphine held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right," she said. "Then I'm coming with you tonight." "No." "Yes." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "I've been in danger my entire life," Seraphine cut him off. "This is just another Tuesday. And besides, you need me there." "Why?" "Because Lucien expects you to show up alone and scared. He expects you to negotiate from weakness. But if I'm standing next to you, it sends a different message." "What message?" "That you know what he did. That you believe me. That you're not pretending anymore." She paused. and that scares him more than anything else you could do. Kyle wanted to argue, wanted to send her somewhere safe, if such a place existed, but the determination in her eyes was absolute. "Fine," he said, "but you stay in the car unless I signal otherwise. Deal." They shook on it. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Gray morning light filtered through the windows, catching on marble and chrome and all the polished surfaces that made the mansion feel more like a museum than a home. Kyle finished his coffee and set the mug aside. "I need to know something," he said. "The note Lucien left. You built the cage she grew up in. How did he know about you, about us?" Seraphine's jaw tightened. "Because I told him." The confession landed like a grenade. "When?" 6 months ago. I thought I could use him. Thought I could get information about the new network by pretending to want revenge against you." She looked away. "I was wrong. He figured out what I was doing and decided to turn it around. Use me to get to you instead." "Jesus. I'm sorry." "Don't be." Cale ran a hand through his hair. "You did what you had to do, same as everyone else in this mess. That's not an excuse." "No, but it's the truth." They stood there in the silent kitchen, two people connected by violence and history and choices neither of them could take back, trying to figure out how to survive what came next. The doorbell rang. Marcus had arrived. Marcus Chen moved through the mansion like a man surveying a battlefield. Tall, lean, with the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of military service in places where mistakes meant body bags. He carried 2 large equipment cases and didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your security system is garbage," he announced, setting the cases down in the foyer. "Whoever disabled it last night knew exactly what they were doing. Professional-grade intrusion, military timing. Can you fix it?" Kyle asked. "I can make it better. Can't make it perfect." Marcus glanced at Seraphine, who'd followed them into the foyer. "You must be Ms. Vale." "Just Seraphine," Marcus nodded. "Marcus Chen. Sorry about what happened." "Don't be. You didn't do it." "No, but I should have seen it coming." He turned back to Cale. "I pulled everything I could find on Dragor. Most of it's speculation and intelligence chatter, but there's enough substance to paint a picture." "And?" Marcus pulled out a tablet and started swiping through files. Lucian Dragor has been operating in the shadows for 7 years, rebuilding trafficking infrastructure across the Pacific Rim. Singapore, Hong Kong, Manila, Vancouver, Seattle. He's not running the network himself. He's the architect, the consultant. He designs the systems, then sells them to whoever can afford his services. "Who's backing the new network?" Seraphine asked. Marcus hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. There's no single organization. It's more like a coalition of independent operators protected by a web of legitimate businesses. Luxury real estate, construction firms, import-export companies, even charitable foundations." Kyle felt his stomach drop. "Names?" "One name keeps appearing in the intelligence chatter." Marcus looked up from the tablet. "Ronan Valicrest." The name detonated in Kyle's head. Ronan Valcrest. Billionaire developer. Public philanthropist. The man who donated millions to trafficking survivor charities and anti-exploitation campaigns. The man who'd given keynote speeches at United Nations conferences about protecting vulnerable populations. "That's impossible," Kyle said. "Is it?" Marcus's expression was grim. "Think about it. Perfect cover. He funds survivor organizations to track potential threats. He finances prevention campaigns to identify weak points in law enforcement. He uses his charitable work to get close to politicians and build protective relationships. Meanwhile, he's secretly financing the same networks he's publicly fighting against. How do you know this? I don't. Not for certain. But the financial patterns are there if you look closely enough. Shell companies, offshore accounts, construction contracts that move more money than the actual work justifies." Marcus paused. "And your old logistics infrastructure? A lot of it now sits inside Valicrest's current development projects." Cale's mind reeled. "Lucian's working for Valicrest," Seraphine said quietly. "That's why he's here. That's why he wants you to reopen the routes." "Not just reopen them," Marcus corrected. "Legitimize them. Valicrest needs infrastructure that looks clean on paper." Your company provides exactly that. Port contracts, shipping agreements, political relationships. Everything Lucien designed 12 years ago, rebuilt and protected by someone so publicly righteous that no one would ever suspect him. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Kyle walked to the window and stared out at Washington Park's rain-soaked lawns. 12 years. He'd spent 12 years building a legitimate empire, convincing himself he'd escaped his past, believing the distance between who he was and who he'd become meant something. But he'd never really escaped at all. He'd just traded one cage for another. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. Cale turned from the window. "How many people do we have on security?" 8 full-time, another 12 on contract for special assignments. "I want everyone active tonight. Full tactical deployment, surveillance, counter-surveillance. Backup teams staged at 3-minute intervals from Alki Beach." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "You're expecting a fight?" "I'm expecting anything." "And if Lucien brings his own people?" "Then we respond accordingly." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You've changed your mind about something. I can see it. What happened?" Cale glanced at Seraphine, who stood near the staircase, watching the exchange with careful attention. "I decided to stop running," he said simply. Marcus nodded slowly. "All right. But Kyle, if this goes bad tonight, we need contingencies." "Like what?" "Like an exit strategy. Like knowing where you're going if you have to disappear. Like having resources staged somewhere Lucien can't touch." "I'm not disappearing." "Then you're planning to die." "I'm planning to fight. Same thing sometimes." Cale met his security chief's eyes. "Get the teams ready. I'll handle the rest." Marcus didn't argue, just picked up his equipment cases and headed toward the security office on the second floor, already making calls on his way up the stairs. Seraphine approached slowly. "You really think you can fight him?" she asked. "I don't know, but I have to try." "Why?" Cale looked at her, at the woman who'd spent 9 months watching him, judging him, waiting to see if he was worth saving. "Because you asked," he said. "And because I need to know if I'm still the man who looked bored while your life was destroyed, or if I've actually become someone different. And if you haven't, then Lucien wins, and I deserve whatever comes after." Seraphine held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, then let's get ready." The rest of the day passed in brutal preparation. Marcus transformed the mansion into a tactical fortress, installing upgraded cameras, deploying mobile surveillance units across the surrounding neighborhood, and briefing security teams on threat scenarios that ranged from simple intimidation to full-scale armed assault. Kale spent hours in his office reviewing every document, every record, every piece of evidence he'd excavated from the encrypted drives. He organized it methodically, chronological timelines, financial flows, personnel connections, everything Lucien needed to bury him, and everything Kyle needed to bury Lucien right back. By late afternoon, gray light fading toward darkness, Kyle had assembled a complete picture of the old Pacific Corridor network. Names, dates, dollar amounts, enough to send a dozen people to prison for decades, including himself. He stared at the files spread across his desk and felt the weight of them pressing down like gravestones. A knock on the door pulled him from the spiral. "Come in." Seraphine entered, holding 2 mugs of fresh coffee. She set one on his desk and took the chair across from him. "You look like hell," she observed. "Feel worse." "Second thoughts?" "About 100 of them." She sipped her coffee. "You can still walk away, you know. Tell Lucien you'll cooperate. Reopen the routes. Keep your empire intact. No one would blame you." "You would. Maybe. But I'm just one person." Kyle leaned back in his chair. "That's the problem, isn't it? For 12 years I told myself it was just business, just logistics, just moving cargo from point A to point B without asking what the cargo was. I convinced myself that not knowing made me innocent." "But you did know," Seraphine said quietly. "Yeah, I knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the names or faces. But I knew enough." He looked at her. "And I didn't care, or I cared just enough to make sure I never had to look directly at what I was doing. That's called complicity." "I know." "So what changed?" Kyle thought about that, about the moment everything shifted. "You," he said finally. "You changed it. by walking into my house and forcing me to see what I spent 12 years refusing to look at. Seraphine set her mug down. I didn't do this to save you, KL. I did it because I needed to know if the man who helped destroy my childhood had actually become someone different, or if he was just better at lying to himself. And? I still don't know. She paused. But tonight might answer that question. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking coffee and watching darkness settle over the city outside. I need to tell you something, Seraphine said eventually. About Lucien. Kael waited. He's not just dangerous because he's smart or ruthless or well-connected, she continued. He's dangerous because he understands how guilt works, how shame works. He knows exactly how to weaponize your conscience against you. I don't follow. He's going to offer you a way out tonight. A way to keep your empire and your reputation intact. A way to make all of this disappear without anyone ever knowing what you did 12 years ago. She met his eyes. And it'll sound reasonable. It'll sound like the smart choice, like the pragmatic choice. But it'll be a trap. Because the moment you take it, you prove to yourself that nothing inside you has actually changed, that you're still the same man who looked bored while children disappeared, and that knowledge will destroy you more completely than any prison sentence ever could. The truth of it hit hard. So what do I do? Kael asked. You decide who you are, Seraphine said simply. Right now, before the meeting. Because once you're in that room with Lucien, it'll be too late. He'll read your hesitation, your doubt, and he'll use it to break you. Kael looked down at the files on his desk, evidence of crimes he'd committed, lives he'd ruined, years he could never give back. I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted. Then figure it out. How? Seraphine stood. By choosing what matters more. Your empire or your conscience, your reputation or your soul, the man you were or the man you could become. She left the office without another word. Kael sat alone in the gathering dark, surrounded by evidence and guilt and the weight of choices he couldn't unmake, trying to figure out how to become someone worth saving. The drive to Alki Beach took 40 minutes through rain-slick streets that reflected neon and headlights like oil on water. Kael sat in the back of the armored SUV, watching Seattle blur past the tinted windows, while his pulse hammered a steady rhythm against his temples. Marcus drove. Seraphine sat beside Kael, staring out her own window with an expression carved from stone. Communications check, Marcus said into his radio. All units confirm position. Static crackled through the speaker, followed by 4 separate voices confirming surveillance positions around the beach meeting point. Backup teams, counter-surveillance, mobile units staged at 3-minute intervals. It should have felt reassuring. It didn't. ETA 7 minutes, Marcus announced. He glanced at Kael in the rearview mirror. Last chance to call this off. Keep driving. Your funeral. The SUV merged onto Beach Drive, hugging the coastline where Puget Sound stretched dark and restless beneath a starless sky. Alki Beach appeared ahead, a curved stretch of sand and boardwalk lined with shuttered restaurants and empty parking lots, off-season, abandoned, perfect for a conversation no one was meant to witness. Marcus pulled into a lot overlooking the water and killed the engine. He's already here, Marcus said, nodding toward a black Mercedes parked 50 yards away, positioned to overlook the beach. Kael could see a figure standing near the waterline. Tall, composed, hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a friend instead of orchestrating a shakedown. Lucien Dragor. I count 2 additional vehicles, Marcus continued, scanning the lot through a handheld scope. Range Rover parked near the north entrance. BMW at the south exit. Probably his security. How many people? Hard to say. Windows are tinted. Could be 1 per vehicle. Could be 4. Kael opened his door. Wait, Seraphine said, grabbing his arm. You don't have to do this alone. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. Her grip tightened. I know what he's going to say. I know how he operates. He'll make you feel like you're negotiating from weakness, like you owe him something, like the only rational choice is to give him what he wants. I know. Do you? Her eyes searched his face. Because 12 years ago, you made that exact choice. You gave people like Lucien what they wanted because it was easier than fighting back, because it paid better, because it let you sleep at night without looking too closely at what you were building. The accusation stung because it was true. I'm not that person anymore, Kael said. Prove it. She released his arm. Kael stepped out into cold wind that tasted like salt and rain. His shoes crunched across gravel as he crossed the parking lot toward the beach. Behind him, he heard the SUV door open, Marcus taking up a position where he could provide overwatch. The sound of waves grew louder as Kael descended wooden steps to the sand. Lucien stood 20 feet away, facing the water, wearing an expensive charcoal coat that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. His dark hair was swept back from a face that belonged in boardrooms and opera houses, refined, elegant, unthreatening, a predator wearing a human mask. Kael Viro, Lucien said without turning around. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Here I am. So you are. Lucien finally turned, and his smile was exactly as Kael remembered, sharp enough to draw blood. You look tired. Not sleeping well? Cut the small talk, Lucien. What do you want? Always so direct. I appreciate that about you. Lucien gestured toward the dark water. Beautiful, isn't it? The sound. I've missed Seattle, such a clean city, so progressive, so committed to justice and equality. Lucien. Right. Business. The smile sharpened. I want your infrastructure reopened. Port access, shipping contracts, the entire logistics network you've spent 12 years legitimizing. I need it operational within 90 days. For what? Import operations. Be specific. Lucien's eyes glittered. I think we both know what I'm talking about, Kael. Let's not insult each other with euphemisms. Kael's jaw tightened. The answer is no. Is it? Lucien pulled something from his coat pocket, a flash drive no bigger than his thumb. This contains every document, every manifest, every financial transfer that ties you to the Pacific Corridor network, bank records, shipping logs, emails, even a few recorded conversations where you discussed logistics with people who are now serving federal prison sentences. He held the drive up like a priest offering communion. If this goes to the FBI, Lucien continued, your empire collapses within 72 hours. Asset forfeiture, criminal charges, your name plastered across every news station in the country as the billionaire philanthropist who made his fortune trafficking human beings. I know what's on that drive. Do you? Because there's new material too. Evidence I've been collecting for the past 2 years. Updated financial forensics connecting your current business operations to the old network. Patterns that prove you never really stopped. You just got better at hiding it. That's bullshit. Is it? Lucien smiled. Or is it close enough to the truth that no jury would see the difference? The wind cut across the beach, carrying spray that tasted like ice. Why me? Kael asked. You could find a dozen other developers willing to provide what you need. Easier targets, people with fewer scruples. But none of them have your specific infrastructure, your port contracts, your political relationships. Lucien paused. And none of them owe me what you owe me. I don't owe you shit. No? Lucien took a step closer. 12 years ago, I made you rich. I handed you an operation worth millions and taught you how to hide it inside legitimate business. Everything you've built since then, every dollar, every contract, every achievement, it all started with money I put in your pocket. Blood money. Money nonetheless. Lucien's expression hardened. You took it eagerly enough back then, didn't ask questions, didn't lose sleep. You just cashed the checks and built your empire on foundations I provided. So don't stand there now and pretend you're better than me, Kael. We're the same. The only difference is I'm honest about what I am. The words hit like fists. I'm not the same person I was 12 years ago, Kael said quietly. Aren't you? Lucien gestured toward the parking lot where the SUV sat waiting. You're still surrounded by security, still living in a fortress, still using money and power to protect yourself from consequences. The only thing that's changed is you've convinced yourself the blood washed off. I know what I did. Do you? Because I don't think you've ever really looked at it. Not honestly. You've spent 12 years running from it, building walls, creating distance, telling yourself you've changed without ever actually facing what you were. Lucien pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Let me show you something. He turned the phone toward Kael. The screen displayed a photograph, grainy, taken from a security camera. It showed a younger version of Kyle standing in a warehouse office, signing documents while two men in suits watched. Behind them, barely visible through a doorway, another room stretched into darkness. Kyle knew what was in that room. He'd always known. "That's you," Lucienne said. 15 years ago, Tacoma Logistics Hub. You were signing off on a shipment manifest while 23 people were locked in the basement below your feet. Children, mostly, ages 9 to 16. Cale's throat closed. One of those children, Lucienne continued, was named Seraphine Vale. She was 13, terrified, certain she was going to die in that basement. And you, he pointed at the photograph, you looked bored. The image burned into Kale's retinas. "I've carried this photograph for 12 years, Lucian said, pocketing his phone. "Not because I'm sentimental, because it reminds me that people like you don't really change. You just get better at lying to yourselves." Kale forced air into his lungs. "What do you want, Lucienne?" "I already told you. Your infrastructure. 90 days. And if I refuse, then I send everything to the FBI. Your empire burns, your reputation dies. And that woman sitting in your SUV right now, Seraphine Vale, the survivor you've been harboring under a false identity, she becomes a national news story. Every detail of what happened to her, every moment of trauma, all of it dragged into public light. The threat landed like a blade between ribs. "You're a real piece of shit," Kyle said. Lucian smiled. "Yes, but I'm an honest piece of shit. I know what I am. Can you say the same?" For a long moment, neither man spoke. Just waves crashing against sand and wind cutting across the beach like knives. "I need time to think," Kale finally said. "You have 72 hours. After that, everything burns." Lucien turned and walked back toward the parking lot, his expensive coat billowing in the wind like a funeral shroud. He paused at the wooden steps. "One more thing, Kyle. That security team you brought tonight? The surveillance units you think I don't know about?" He glanced back over his shoulder. "I counted 8. You should have brought more." Then he was gone, climbing into his Mercedes and driving away like he'd just concluded a successful business meeting instead of a shakedown. Kyle stood alone on the beach, breathing hard, fists clenched so tight his knuckles ached. Behind him, footsteps crunched across sand. Marcus appeared at his shoulder. "You okay?" "No." "What did he say?" "Exactly what we expected." Kale turned away from the water. "He wants the infrastructure reopened. 72 hours to decide. After that, he goes to the feds." "Can he actually do that?" "Yeah, he can." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Then we need to move fast. Get ahead of this before—" "Before what?" Kale cut him off. "Before Lucien destroys my reputation? Before my company collapses? Before every news station in the country brands me a monster? Before he wins. He's already won, Marcus. The moment I signed those manifests 15 years ago, this outcome became inevitable. I just didn't know it yet. That's bullshit. You still have options." "Like what?" "Fight back. Use the evidence you have against him. Expose Valicrest. Burn the whole network down before they can burn you." Kale looked at his security chief. A good man, loyal, willing to follow orders, even when those orders led straight into hell. "And what happens to Seraphine?" Kyle asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer. "If I go to war with Lucien," Kyle continued, "her identity goes public. Her story becomes headline news. Every trauma she's survived gets dragged into daylight and dissected by reporters and internet trolls and people who think they understand what she went through. She's stronger than you think. That's not the point. The point is she didn't ask for this. She came to my house looking for answers, and I turned her life into ammunition in a war she shouldn't have to fight. So what are you saying? You're just going to give Lucien what he wants?" "I don't know what I'm saying." Marcus grabbed his arm. "Listen to me. You go down this road, you reopen those routes, and you prove Lucien right. You prove you haven't changed, that you're still the same man who looked the other way while people suffered." "I know." "Then what the hell are we doing here?" Kyle pulled free and started walking back toward the parking lot. He found Seraphine standing outside the SUV, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She watched him approach with eyes that saw too much. "What did he offer you?" she asked. 72 hours to reopen the infrastructure. After that, He burns everything. And you said no. It wasn't a question. I said I needed time to think. Something shifted in Seraphine's expression. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. You're actually considering it, she said. I'm considering all the options. No, you're looking for a way out. A way to keep your empire intact and tell yourself you didn't have a choice. She stepped closer. That's what Lucien does. He gives you just enough rope to hang yourself, then watches while you tie the knot. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Either you reopen the routes and prove nothing inside you has changed, or you refuse and accept the consequences. There's no third option. What about you? Kael demanded. If I refuse, your identity goes public. Your story becomes national news. Every trauma you've survived gets turned into entertainment for millions of people who don't know you and don't care about anything except the spectacle. I know. And you're okay with that? No, but I'd rather burn in public than watch you become the same man who helped destroy my childhood. The words cut deeper than Lucien's threats. Marcus cleared his throat. We should go. Lucien's people might circle back. They climbed into the SUV and headed back toward the city in silence. Rain started again halfway through the drive, turning Seattle into a blur of gray and shadow. Kael stared out the window and felt the weight of 72 hours pressing down like concrete. The mansion felt colder when they returned. Marcus deployed the security teams into protective positions around the perimeter, then disappeared into the control room to review surveillance footage from the beach meeting. Seraphine retreated to the guest room without a word. Kael stood in his office, staring at the files still spread across his desk. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Did you enjoy our conversation? Lucien's voice came through smooth as glass. I find beach meetings so refreshing. Fewer witnesses. Better acoustics. How did you get this number? Please. I had access to your entire communications network back when you were signing manifests in Tacoma. Did you really think I'd lose that access just because you changed companies? Kael's jaw clenched. What do you want? To help you understand what you're facing. See, I know you, Kael. I know how your mind works. Right now, you're sitting in your office, surrounded by evidence, trying to figure out some clever way to outmaneuver me, some strategy that lets you keep your empire and your conscience intact. You don't know shit about me. Don't I? Let me guess. You're thinking about going to the FBI yourself. Preemptive confession. Turn state's witness and hope for immunity. Maybe you even think you can spin it as redemption, the repentant billionaire trying to make amends. Kael said nothing. The problem, Lucien continued, is that strategy requires you to burn Seraphine along with everything else. Her identity, her privacy, her right to control her own story. And I don't think you're willing to do that, because despite everything, despite the wealth and the violence and the 12 years of carefully managed denial, you actually care what she thinks of you. Get to the point. The point is you're trapped. If you cooperate, you prove you haven't changed. If you resist, you destroy an innocent woman's life. Either way, you lose. Unless? Lucien laughed. There is no unless. That's what I'm trying to help you understand. You made choices 15 years ago that created this situation. Now you get to live with the consequences. You're enjoying this. Immensely. But it's not personal, Kael. It's just business. The same business we used to be partners in, remember? The same business that made you rich and powerful and respected. You built your empire on foundations I provided. Now I'm simply asking for a return on my investment. By threatening to destroy me. By offering you a choice. Cooperate and keep everything you've built. Refuse and watch it burn. That's more generous than most people in my position would be. Kael's hand tightened around the phone. What about Valicrest? What's his role in this? Silence stretched across the line. Careful, Kael. Questions like that suggest you've been doing research. Research means you're looking for leverage. And looking for leverage means you're planning to fight back. Lucien's tone shifted, losing its playful edge. That would be a mistake. A very serious mistake. The kind that ends with more than just your reputation burning. Is that a threat? It's a clarification. Ronan Valicrest is not someone you want to fuck with. He's protected by people who make me look like a street-level hustler, senators, federal judges, international financiers, people who could erase you from existence and no one would ask questions. Then why do you need me? Because you're useful. Because your infrastructure is already established and above suspicion. Because bringing in someone new would create unnecessary complications. Lucian paused. But make no mistake, you're not irreplaceable. If you become more trouble than you're worth, there are other options. Messier options. Options that involve more than just evidence going to the FBI. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. 72 hours, Kyle. Use them wisely. The line went dead. Kale set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if handled too roughly. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the desk and forced air into his lungs. A soft knock interrupted the silence. "Come in." Seraphine entered, changed into clean clothes but still wearing the weight of the evening across her shoulders. "I heard you on the phone," she said. "Lucien?" "Yeah." "What did he want?" "To remind me I'm trapped." Seraphine walked to the window and stared out at the dark grounds. Security lights carved the lawn into geometric shapes, safe zones, and killing fields. "My father used to say something," she said quietly. "Before everything happened, before I was taken. He said the difference between a cage and a home is whether you can leave." Kyle waited. "I spent 3 years in actual cages," Seraphine continued. "Basements, shipping containers, rooms with locks on the outside and no windows, places where leaving wasn't an option, where choice didn't exist." She turned from the window. "After I escaped, I spent another 10 years in different cages. Foster systems, shelters, group homes, places that weren't locked but still felt like prisons because I couldn't control anything about my life." "Where are you going with this? You think you're trapped. You think Lucien has you cornered with no way out. But you're wrong. You have choices. You've always had choices. The cage you're in was built by decisions you made, and it can be unlocked by different decisions. The only question is whether you're willing to walk through the door. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You're just scared of what's on the other side." "Damn right I'm scared. On the other side of that door is prison, public humiliation, the complete destruction of everything I've built over 12 years, and your life getting dragged through the mud along with mine." Seraphine crossed her arms. "You want to know what scares me?" "What?" "That you'll choose the cage. That you'll convince yourself cooperating with Lucien is the pragmatic choice. The smart choice. The choice that minimizes harm. And then you'll spend the rest of your life telling yourself you didn't have options when the truth is you just weren't brave enough to walk away from your empire." The accusation landed like a slap. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Seraphine's voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair that I spent my teenage years being bought and sold like furniture? Was it fair that the man who helped build that system gets to live in a mansion while I scrubbed his floors under a fake name? Was it fair that Lucien gets to walk around threatening people with evidence of crimes he fucking orchestrated? No, none of it's fair." "Then stop acting like fairness matters. Stop looking for the option that lets you keep your hands clean. Your hands are already dirty, Kale. They've been dirty for 15 years. The only question now is whether you're going to keep them dirty or actually do something that matters." "Like what?" "Like burning it all down. Like exposing Valacres. Like going to the FBI yourself before Lucien can control the narrative. Like choosing to be the person who stops this instead of the person who enables it." Kyle's phone buzzed again. This time the message was from Marcus. "Security footage from beach meeting. You need to see this. Now." "I have to go," Kale said. "Of course you do." Seraphine headed for the door, then stopped. 72 hours, Kyle. That's what Lucien gave you. But the clock that actually matters is faster. Every minute you spend trying to find a perfect solution is a minute you're not doing anything at all. And doing nothing is its own kind of choice. She left. Kale grabbed his phone and headed downstairs to the security control room. Marcus had the footage queued up on the main monitor, multiple camera angles stitched together from the surveillance teams positioned around Alki Beach. "What am I looking at?" Kyle asked. "This." Marcus hit play. The footage showed Lucien's Mercedes arriving at the beach 15 minutes before Kyle's SUV. 2 additional vehicles, the Range Rover and BMW Marcus had spotted, pulled in shortly after. But instead of staying in their cars, 4 men emerged and took up positions around the parking lot. Marcus froze the frame and zoomed in on one of the men. Kyle's stomach dropped. The man was carrying an assault rifle under his coat. Not concealed, just partially hidden, like he wanted people to know it was there but didn't want to wave it around openly. All four of them were armed, Marcus said. Military-grade weapons, professional positioning. These weren't bodyguards, Kale. They were a hit squad. You think Lucien was planning to kill me? No, I think he was planning to have the option. If you'd agreed to cooperate, everyone walks away clean. But if you'd refused on the spot, if you'd told him to fuck off and walked away, Marcus let the implication hang. Kale felt cold spreading through his chest. He would have killed me right there. Maybe. Or maybe he would have just made you disappear long enough to reconsider your position. Either way, those guys weren't there for show. Marcus advanced the footage. But here's the interesting part. Watch Lucien's body language when you tell him you need time to think. The footage showed Lucien's face and profile, calm, composed, smiling, but his right hand twitched slightly, then curled into a fist before relaxing again. He was pissed, Marcus said. Really pissed. He expected you to either cave immediately or refuse outright. The fact that you asked for time threw him off his script. Why does that matter? Because it means he's operating on a timeline. Something's pushing him, something urgent. Otherwise, he would have given you more rope. Let you twist in the wind for a week or two while the pressure built. But 72 hours? That's tight. That's desperate. Kale's mind started working through implications. You think the new network has a deadline. I think Lucien has a deadline, which means Valicrest has a deadline, which means whoever's backing Valicrest has a deadline. Marcus pulled up another window on the monitor, financial tracking data. I did some digging after the meeting, cross-referenced Valicrest's current development projects against shipping schedules and port activity. And there's a container ship scheduled to dock at the Port of Seattle in 86 hours. The manifest lists it as construction materials for one of Valicrest's luxury developments in Bellevue. But the tonnage doesn't match, the shipping route doesn't match. And the company that chartered the vessel is a shell corporation registered in Panama with exactly zero operational history. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. It's a trafficking shipment, Kyle said. That's my guess. A big one. And they need your port access to get it through customs clean. Without your infrastructure, without your contracts and your political relationships, that shipment becomes a massive liability. So if I refuse, they lose millions, maybe tens of millions, maybe more than money. Maybe they lose the trust of whoever's financing the operation. Maybe the whole network collapses because they can't deliver on promises they've made. Kael stared at the frozen image of Lucien's face on the monitor, all that elegant composure hiding desperation underneath. He's bluffing, Kael said quietly. About what? About waiting 72 hours. He can't wait that long. The ship docks in 86 hours. He needs my answer before then, probably within 48 hours. Otherwise, he has to scramble for alternatives and hope they work. Which means I have leverage I didn't know I had. Marcus turned from the monitor. What are you planning? I don't know yet. Kyle pulled out his phone. But I need to make a call first. He dialed a number he'd been avoiding for 12 years. It rang 6 times before connecting. Federal Bureau of Investigation, how may I direct your call? Kyle took a breath. I need to speak with someone about organized crime. Pacific Northwest Division. It's urgent. They transferred him 3 times before he finally reached someone who could help. This is Agent Elena Cross. Who am I speaking with? The voice was female, professional, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of dealing with bullshit and recognizing when something real walked through the door. My name is Kyle Viro. I have information about a human trafficking operation operating out of Seattle. I think you're going to want to hear this. Silence. Then, Mr. Viro, I'm going to need you to come into the field office. Can you be here tomorrow morning? Yes. 9 a.m. Ask for me at the front desk. And Mr. Viro? Yeah? Don't talk to anyone about this. Don't send emails. Don't make any more phone calls. Just come in tomorrow morning and we'll discuss it then. Understood. Agent Cross hung up. Kale set his phone down and found Marcus staring at him like he'd just announced plans to jump off the Space Needle. You just called the FBI, Marcus said slowly. Yeah. You understand what that means? Yeah. You understand there's no walking this back. The moment you sit down in that office tomorrow, the moment you start talking, everything changes. Your company, your reputation, your entire life. I know. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Jesus Christ. Okay, if we're doing this, we need to prepare. We need documentation. We need evidence organized and verified. I know what we need. Kyle stood. I've been preparing for this since I came back from the beach. Maybe longer, maybe for 12 years without realizing it. What about Seraphine? What about her? She's going to have to testify. You understand that, right? If you're building a case against Lucien and Valicrest, the FBI is going to want victim testimony. They're going to want her story. All of it. Kyle felt his chest tighten. I'll talk to her. And if she says no, then she says no. I won't force her into anything. The case might fall apart without her. Then it falls apart. Marcus studied him for a long moment. You really have changed, haven't you? I don't know. Ask me again when this is over. Kale left the control room and climbed the stairs back to the 3rd floor. His office felt smaller now, walls pressing in like the mansion itself was trying to crush him. He stood at the window and stared out at the dark city, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Trying to imagine sitting across from federal agents and confessing everything. Trying to imagine watching his empire collapse in real time. But mostly, he thought about Seraphine. About the 13-year-old girl locked in a basement while he signed manifests upstairs. About the woman who'd spent 9 months watching him, judging him, waiting to see if he was worth saving. About whether he'd finally become someone different or just someone better at lying to himself. The office door opened behind him. I heard, Seraphine said. Kale turned. She stood in the doorway wearing an expression he couldn't quite read, something between fear and hope and exhausted resignation. Marcus told you. He thought I should know before tomorrow. She stepped into the office. Are you sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Why? Kale looked at her, really looked at her. Not just seeing the woman who cleaned his floors, but seeing the survivor who'd walked back into the life of the man who helped destroy her childhood. Because you asked me a question 9 months ago, he said. When you applied for the job, you asked if I believed people could change. Seraphine nodded slowly. I remember. I told you yes. I told you people could change if they were willing to do the work. Kale's voice roughened. But I didn't do the work. I just built walls and convinced myself distance was the same thing as growth. And now I'm out of time, out of walls, out of places to hide. So this is about redemption. No. Kale shook his head. Redemption implies I can be forgiven, that I can make amends for what I did. But some things are too big to fix. Too many lives damaged, too much time lost. Then what is it about? Honesty. For the first time in 15 years, I'm going to stop lying to myself about what I am and what I did, and I'm going to face the consequences instead of running from them. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. They're going to want me to testify, she finally said. Probably. They're going to ask me to relive everything, every detail, every moment of trauma. They're going to turn my life into evidence and parade it in front of cameras and courtrooms and people who think they understand what I went through. Yes. And if I say no? Kyle met her eyes. Then you say no. I won't ask you to do anything you're not ready for. I won't use your pain as ammunition. If you want to walk away right now, tonight, and never look back, I'll understand. Will you? Yeah, because this is my mess, my consequence. You don't owe me anything. Seraphine crossed her arms, hugging herself like she was trying to hold something inside from breaking loose. I've thought about this moment for years, she said quietly. Imagined what it would feel like to finally confront the people who destroyed my childhood, to look them in the eye and make them see what they did, to watch them face consequences. And I'm terrified. Not of them, of myself, of what it'll cost to drag everything into daylight, of whether I'll survive it intact or just break apart into pieces I can't put back together. Kyle wanted to say something reassuring, something about strength and survival and how she'd already endured worse. But the words felt empty, patronizing, like trying to comfort someone drowning by telling them water wasn't that deep. I can't promise it won't hurt, he said instead. I can't promise it'll be worth it. All I can promise is that if you choose to do this, you won't be alone. Whatever happens, however bad it gets, I'll be there too. Not as some kind of savior, just as someone who's finally stopped running from the truth." Seraphine wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? I'll testify. I'll tell them everything, every detail they want, every moment I've spent trying to forget." She looked up at him. "But not for you. Not for redemption or forgiveness or any of that shit. For me. Because I'm tired of carrying this alone, tired of pretending I'm fine, tired of letting the people who hurt me walk around free while I'm still locked in cages they built. I understand. Do you? Because this is going to destroy both of us, KL. Once we walk into that FBI office tomorrow, there's no coming back. No walking away. No second chances. We burn together, or we don't burn at all." Kale thought about the empire he'd built, the reputation he'd cultivated, the 12 years he'd spent convincing himself he'd escaped his past. All of it built on foundations of blood and silence. All of it about to collapse. "Then we burn," he said. Seraphine extended her hand, not in friendship, not in forgiveness, in partnership. Two people choosing to walk into fire together because the alternative was staying in cages built from their own choices. Kael took her hand. They stood there in the silent office while rain hammered against the windows and thunder rolled across the Seattle skyline. Two damaged people connected by violence and history and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, honesty mattered more than survival. "We should get some sleep," Seraphine said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be hell." "Yeah." She released his hand and headed for the door, then stopped. "Kael? Yeah? Thank you." "For what?" "For finally choosing to see what you helped build instead of looking away." She left. Kael stood alone in his office, surrounded by evidence and guilt and the weight of choices he could never unmake, trying to prepare himself for the destruction coming with the dawn. His phone buzzed one final time. Another message from Lucien. "TikTok." Kael deleted it without responding. Then he pulled up his laptop and started writing down everything he remembered. Every name, every shipment, every detail from 15 years of complicity that he'd spent 12 years trying to forget. The confession ran to 47 pages by the time he finished. Outside, rain turned to sleet as November cold settled over the city like a shroud. And somewhere in the dark, Lucien Dragor sat in his expensive apartment, staring at surveillance feeds and financial spreadsheets, completely unaware that the man he'd been threatening for 12 years had finally stopped running. The 72-hour clock kept ticking, but Kael wasn't waiting anymore. He was done being trapped, done choosing cages over freedom, done lying to himself about what he was and what he'd done. Tomorrow morning, he would walk into the FBI field office and confess everything. And then the real war would begin. Dawn came gray and merciless. Kael stood in the shower, letting scalding water hammer against his shoulders until his skin turned red, trying to wash away the exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The 47-page confession sat printed and organized in a manila folder on his desk upstairs. Every crime cataloged, every name documented, every shipment detailed with the cold precision of someone preparing their own execution. He dried off and dressed in a dark suit, the kind he wore to funerals and board meetings where bad news got delivered in expensive conference rooms. When he looked in the mirror, the man staring back seemed older than 43, hollowed out, like someone had scooped away everything soft inside and left only bones and obligations. Downstairs, he found Seraphine already awake, drinking coffee in the kitchen beneath that same amber light that had illuminated her bruised throat 3 nights ago. She wore jeans and a simple black sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back, ready for war. "You sleep?" Kael asked. "No." "You?" "No." They drank coffee in silence while gray morning light bled through the windows. Marcus appeared at 7:30, carrying his own folder of surveillance footage and financial records. "Security teams are staged. If Lucien tries anything today, we'll know about it." "He won't," Kael said. "Not yet. He thinks he has 72 hours. He thinks I'm still deciding." "And when he realizes you've gone to the feds? Then we find out how desperate he really is." They left the mansion at 8:15 in the armored SUV, Marcus driving while Kyle and Seraphine sat in back like defendants being transported to sentencing. The city moved around them in morning rush hour chaos, commuters heading to jobs that mattered and jobs that didn't, people living ordinary lives that would continue exactly as before regardless of what happened in the FBI field office today. Kyle envied them. The federal building downtown rose 15 stories of concrete and glass that reflected low clouds like dirty mirrors. Marcus pulled into the underground parking garage and killed the engine. "Last chance to walk away," he said. Kyle grabbed his folder. "Let's go." They rode the elevator to the 7th floor in silence. Seraphine stood rigid beside him, breathing carefully like someone trying not to hyperventilate. Kale wanted to say something reassuring but couldn't find words that wouldn't sound like lies. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air. A woman behind bulletproof glass looked up from her computer. "Help you?" Kale Viro to see Agent Elena Cross. 9 a.m. appointment. The receptionist made a call, spoke quietly, then buzzed them through a security door. A young agent in a cheap suit appeared and led them down hallways lined with generic motivational posters about teamwork and integrity that felt like bad jokes given the circumstances. They reached a conference room at the end of the hall. The agent opened the door and gestured inside. "Agent Cross will be right with you." The conference room was exactly what Kyle expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a table scarred by years of depositions and interrogations, chairs designed for discomfort rather than support. Windows overlooked the city, gray and indifferent. Seraphine took a seat near the windows. Marcus positioned himself by the door like a bodyguard who knew he couldn't actually protect anyone from what was coming. Kyle stood at the head of the table, holding his folder like a shield that wouldn't stop anything. 5 minutes passed. Then the door opened and Agent Elena Cross walked in. She was younger than Kale expected, mid-40s maybe, with sharp eyes and dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She wore a pantsuit that had seen better days and carried herself with the kind of controlled intensity that came from years of dealing with monsters who wore human faces. "Mr. Viro." She didn't offer to shake hands, just set her own folder on the table and studied him with an expression that gave nothing away. "I'm Agent Cross. This is Agent Michael Torres." A second agent followed her in, Latino, early 30s, built like someone who spent lunch breaks in the gym. He closed the door behind him and took up position against the wall. "Thank you for coming in," Agent Cross continued. "Before we begin, I need to advise you that anything you say here can and will be used in federal investigations and prosecutions. You have the right to have an attorney present. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Do you wish to have an attorney present?" "No." Agent Cross's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're sure? Given what you told me on the phone last night, I strongly recommend—" "I don't want a lawyer. I want to confess." The room went very quiet. Agent Cross exchanged a glance with Torres, then pulled out a chair and sat. "All right. Why don't you start at the beginning?" Kale set his folder on the table but didn't open it yet. 15 years ago, I worked as a logistics coordinator for a company called Pacific Freight Solutions. We handled shipping and warehousing for construction firms across the Pacific Northwest. Legitimate work, mostly, but we also provided infrastructure for a human trafficking network operating along the West Coast corridor. Agent Cross's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened like blades catching light. "Continue." The network moved people, mostly women and children, through a series of warehouse facilities disguised as storage hubs for building materials. Tacoma, Portland, Vancouver. Sometimes international shipments routed through cargo containers mixed with actual construction supplies. The operation was run by a man named Lucian Dragor. "We're familiar with Mr. Dragor," Agent Cross said quietly. "Then you know he disappeared 7 years ago. Federal heat got too intense, so he went underground. Rebuilt in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, but now he's back. And the network is returning with him. Bigger than before. Better protected." "How do you know this?" Kyle nodded toward Seraphine. "Because one of his victims has been living in my house for 9 months under a false identity. And 3 nights ago, Lucian broke into my home and assaulted her to send me a message." Agent Cross turned her attention to Seraphine for the first time. "Is this true?" Seraphine met her gaze without flinching. "Yes." "What's your name?" "Seraphine Vale."
Something flickered across Agent Cross's face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. Ms. Vale, I'm going to need you to tell me what happened. All of it. Can you do that? Yes. For the next 40 minutes, Seraphine recounted her story with brutal precision. The warehouse in Tacoma, the basement behind the false wall, the 3 years she spent being moved through the network before aging out and escaping, the 9 months she spent working inside Kael's mansion, watching him, waiting to see if the man who'd helped build the machine that destroyed her childhood had actually changed. She spoke without breaking, without asking for pity, like a survivor dragging truth into daylight with bare hands. Agent Cross listened in absolute silence, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook that filled with careful handwriting. When Seraphine finished, the agent set her pen down and looked at Kael. "And where do you fit into this, Mr. Viro?" Kael opened his folder. "I provided logistics support for the network from 2008 to 2011, shipping manifests, warehouse access, transport coordination. I signed documents authorizing shipments I never questioned because asking questions meant looking too closely at what I was helping build." He slid the first page across the table. "This is a comprehensive confession detailing every shipment I authorized, every document I signed, every dollar I earned from the operation." Agent Cross picked up the page and started reading. Her expression remained neutral, but Kael could see her jaw tightening with each line. "Jesus Christ," she said quietly, "there's 46 more pages." "I can see that." She looked up at him. "Why are you doing this? Why confess now after 12 years? "Because Lucy Yin contacted me 3 days ago. He wants my current infrastructure reopened for a new operation. Container ship docking at the port of Seattle in 3 days. He's using my past crimes as leverage to force my cooperation. And if you refuse?" He goes public with evidence that destroys my reputation and company, and he exposes Ms. Vale's identity to national media. Agent Cross set the page down and leaned back in her chair, studying Kael like he was a particularly complex puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Let me make sure I understand. You're confessing to federal crimes that could put you in prison for decades. You're volunteering to destroy your own empire. You're offering to cooperate with an investigation that will almost certainly result in criminal prosecution. And you're doing all this to stop Lucian Dragor from reopening a trafficking network." "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Kael looked at Seraphine, who sat perfectly still near the window, watching him with eyes that held too much history. "Because I'm tired of being complicit," he said. "Tired of running from what I did. Tired of convincing myself that distance and money make me clean, when the truth is my hands have been bloody for 15 years. Agent Cross was quiet for a long moment. "All right," she finally said. "Here's what's going to happen. Agent Torres and I are going to review your confession. We're going to verify as much as we can through existing databases and intelligence networks. Then we're going to bring in the U.S. Attorney's Office and discuss potential immunity deals in exchange for your full cooperation. I'm not asking for immunity. You should be, because without it, this confession puts you in federal prison for the rest of your life." "I know. Mr. Viro, I don't want immunity," Kael cut her off. "I don't want a deal. I want to help you stop the network. After that, whatever happens to me happens. I'll accept responsibility for what I did." Agent Cross exchanged another glance with Torres. The younger agent looked like he couldn't decide if Kael was suicidal or just stupid. "That's admirable," Agent Cross said carefully. "But the reality is we need your cooperation more than we need your martyrdom. A confession without corroborating testimony is just words on paper. We need you functional. We need you able to testify. We need you—" The conference room door burst open. A third agent appeared, older, with gray hair, and the kind of face that had seen too many bad things to be surprised by anything anymore. "Cross, we need to talk. Now." Agent Cross's expression shifted. "I'm in the middle of now," the older agent repeated, his tone allowing zero argument. She stood. "Excuse me for a moment." Both agents stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind them but leaving it slightly ajar. Kael could hear muffled conversation, urgent, heated, fragments of words that didn't quite form complete sentences. Marcus moved closer to the door, trying to hear better. "What's happening?" Seraphine asked quietly. "I don't know." The conversation in the hallway grew louder. Kael caught fragments.
Can't be serious. Direct orders from political shitstorm. Then Agent Cross's voice, sharp with anger. I don't care who's calling. This is an active investigation. It was an active investigation. As of 10 minutes ago, it's suspended pending review from Main Justice. The words landed like grenades. The hallway went silent. Then Agent Cross stormed back into the conference room with her face carved from fury and frustration. The older agent followed, looking grim. What's going on? Kyle asked. Agent Cross didn't answer immediately, just stood there breathing hard, hands clenched into fists at her sides. Agent Cross? Kyle pressed. I'm sorry, Mr. Vero. This interview is over. The words hit like a punch to the sternum. What? I've been ordered to suspend this investigation pending review from the Department of Justice. All evidence collected today is to be sealed until further notice. You can't be serious. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. I'm sitting here confessing to federal crimes. I'm handing you everything you need to dismantle an active trafficking network. You can't just... I said I don't have a choice. Agent Cross's voice cracked with barely controlled rage. As of 20 minutes ago, someone very high up the chain made a phone call. That phone call became an order. That order became my reality. And now I'm telling you to take your confession and leave this building before I'm forced to have you escorted out. Kyle felt the ground shifting beneath him. Who made the call? I can't tell you that. Bullshit. Someone's protecting Lucian. Someone with enough juice to shut down a federal investigation. Who? Agent Cross looked at the older agent, who shook his head once. I'm sorry, she said again. And this time Kyle could hear genuine anguish beneath the professionalism. I can't help you. Marcus stepped forward. This is insane. You're going to let political pressure kill an investigation into human trafficking? I'm not letting anything happen, Agent Cross snapped. I'm following orders I don't agree with from people I can't refuse. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. Seraphine stood slowly from her chair. So that's it? I tell you everything that happened to me. He confesses to crimes that could destroy him. And you just send us away because someone made a phone call? Yes. The admission seemed to cost Agent Cross something vital. That's exactly what I'm doing, because if I don't, I lose my badge, my career, and any chance of helping the next victim who walks through that door. So I'm making a choice, and I hate it, but I'm making it anyway. The conference room fell into heavy silence. Cale picked up his folder of confessions with hands that felt numb. 47 pages. Every crime documented. Every name recorded. Worthless now. Just paper and ink that no one would ever read. Come on, Marcus said quietly. Let's go. They walked out of the conference room in stunned silence. The hallway felt longer on the way out. The elevator took forever to arrive. By the time they reached the parking garage, Kyle's mind was spinning through implications faster than he could process them. Someone had shut down the investigation. Someone with enough power to override federal agents. Someone protecting Lucien and Valicrest, Boss, and the entire network. They climbed into the SUV. Marcus started the engine but didn't put it in gear. What now? He asked. Cale stared at his reflection in the dashboard screen. A man who just tried to do the right thing and discovered the system was more corrupt than he'd ever imagined. Now we find out who made that call, he said. The drive back to the mansion felt like traveling through a dream where everything looked normal but nothing made sense. Cale's phone buzzed with incoming messages, contractors asking about project delays, investors wanting updates on development timelines, the ordinary machinery of his empire grinding forward while everything beneath the surface collapsed. He ignored all of it. When they arrived home, Kyle went straight to his office and started making calls. First to political contacts who owed him favors, then to journalists who'd covered federal corruption cases, then to lawyers who specialized in Department of Justice malfeasance. Every conversation ended the same way. No one could help. No one would help. The wall protecting Lucien and Valicrest was higher and stronger than anything Kyle had imagined. Not just money, not just political influence, something deeper, something institutional. By 3 p.m, Kyle was pacing his office like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear while a lawyer in Washington, D.C. explained in careful language why pursuing this further would be career suicide. I appreciate the advice, Kyle said, cutting him off mid-sentence.
But I'm not looking for career protection. I'm looking for a way to stop a trafficking network from... His phone beeped with an incoming call. Unknown number. Cale's stomach dropped. I need to take this, he told the lawyer and switched lines. Hello? Hello, Kyle. Lucian's voice came through smooth as poisoned honey. I heard you had an interesting morning, FBI field office. Very dramatic. Very noble. Cold spread through Kyle's chest. How did you know about it? Please, I have friends everywhere, including people who make phone calls to the Department of Justice when situations require management. Lucian paused. Did you really think you could walk into a federal building and confess your way to redemption? Did you think Agent Cross was going to pin a medal on your chest and send you home a hero? How did you shut it down? I didn't shut anything down. I simply made sure the right people understood the situation. Made sure they knew that pursuing this investigation would create complications no one wants. Political complications. Financial complications. The kind that end careers and ruin reputations. Whose reputation? Valicrest's? Lucian laughed. You're still thinking too small, KL. Ronan Valicrest is just one piece of a much larger machine. The people protecting him, protecting us, they're not doing it because they care about trafficking. They're doing it because the network generates revenue. Billions of dollars flowing through legitimate businesses and offshore accounts. Money that funds campaigns and lobbies and special interests that keep certain people very comfortable. The scope of it hit Kyle like a freight train. You're talking about systemic corruption. I'm talking about reality. The system you thought would save you, it's already bought and paid for. The agents you thought would protect Seraphine, they take orders from people who profit from suffering. Everything you believed about justice and accountability, it's a fairy tale we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. Kale's hand tightened around the phone. I'm going to stop you. With what? Your confession that no one will ever read? Your moral authority that disappeared the moment you signed those manifests 15 years ago? Your money? Lucian's voice turned cold. You have nothing, KL. No leverage. No allies. No options. You tried to be a hero today and discovered heroes don't exist, just survivors and casualties. And right now you're headed for casualty status. What do you want? The same thing I've always wanted. Your infrastructure, your port access, your shipping contracts. 48 hours to decide since you wasted your first day playing FBI informant. After that, everything burns. Your company, your reputation, and Seraphine's identity splashed across every news station in the country. And if I cooperate, then the network gets what it needs. The ship docks clean. No one asks questions. And you get to keep your empire intact, not whole. You've lost too much credibility for that. But functional. Survivable. That's not a choice. Yes, it is. It's just not the choice you wanted. Lucian paused. 48 hours, KL. Use them better than you used the last 24. The line went dead. Kale stood in his office, staring at the phone like it might explode. His chest felt tight, his pulse hammered in his temples. Every assumption he'd made about how this would play out, about going to the FBI, about cooperation and immunity, about stopping the network through legitimate channels, all of it crumbled like sand. The door opened. Seraphine walked in looking like she'd been crying but had forced herself to stop. I heard, she said. How much? Enough. Marcus has surveillance on your office phone. He was monitoring in case Lucian called. Good. No, not good. Seraphine moved closer. We just learned the entire federal system is compromised. We learned that going to the authorities doesn't work because the authorities are part of the problem. We learned... I know what we learned. Then what are we going to do? Kale looked at her, at the woman who'd survived 3 years in the machine he'd helped build, who'd spent 9 months watching him to see if he was worth saving, who'd chosen to walk into the FBI office this morning knowing it might destroy her all over again. I don't know, he admitted. The confession felt like surrender. Seraphine sat down in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. There has to be something, some angle we're not seeing, some leverage we haven't used. Like what? Lucian just proved he controls the FBI investigation, which means he probably controls state authorities too. Local police. Anyone who might actually be able to help. What about going public? Media exposure?
Media owned by the same people who profit from the network? The same people whose advertising revenue comes from corporations hiding trafficking infrastructure inside legitimate business. Kyle shook his head. We'd be drowned out by lawyers and PR firms before the story even broke. Then we run. Disappear. Get out of Seattle and rebuild somewhere Lucian can't reach us. He'd reach us. Someone with that much institutional protection doesn't let loose ends survive. We'd be found within a week. Maybe less. Seraphine's expression cracked. So we're just giving up? After everything, after the confession, after exposing ourselves, after choosing to fight back, we're just surrendering? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Kyle walked to the window and stared out at the estate grounds, manicured lawns and security fences and all the polished surfaces that made the mansion feel like a fortress. But fortresses could be prisons too, and he'd been living in one for 12 years without realizing it. I'm saying the system won't save us, he said quietly. The FBI won't save us. The law won't save us. Everything I thought we could rely on, every institution I believed would eventually do the right thing, it's all compromised, corrupted, bought. So what does that leave? Kyle turned from the window. Us. It leaves us. What's that supposed to mean? It means if the system won't stop Lucien, we have to stop him ourselves. Outside the system. Outside the law. Using methods that don't rely on anyone else's authority or protection. Seraphine's eyes widened. You're talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about survival. About doing whatever it takes to destroy the network before it can destroy us. Kale, I spent 15 years playing by rules written by people who profit from suffering. I spent 12 years convincing myself that working within the system made me legitimate, clean, better than what I used to be. His voice hardened, but the system just proved it doesn't work. It proved that people like Lucien own the referees. So maybe it's time to stop playing their game and start playing mine. What does that mean specifically? It means we find that container ship. We expose what's inside in a way that can't be covered up or shut down. We force the truth into daylight so bright that even people who profit from darkness can't ignore it. How? Kale pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. Marcus said the ship docks in 3 days, which means it's probably in international waters right now, heading towards Seattle. If we can intercept it before it reaches port, if we can document what's inside and broadcast it live where it can't be censored, that's insane. Probably. You're talking about boarding a cargo ship in open water, about confronting armed traffickers, about creating evidence that could get us killed. Yeah. And you think this is better than cooperating with Lucien? Kyle looked at her. I think cooperating with Lucien makes us complicit again, makes us part of the machine, makes everything we did this morning, every risk we took, every truth we spoke, meaningless. So yeah, I think trying something insane is better than surrendering. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. You're really willing to die for this, she finally said. I'm really willing to try. Why? Because you asked me a question 9 months ago. You asked if I was worth saving, and I still don't know the answer. But I know that if I give Lucien what he wants, the answer becomes no. Permanently. Irreversibly. I become exactly the man you expected to find when you started working here. The man who looks bored while children disappear. Tears welled in Seraphine's eyes. This is going to get us killed. Maybe. And if we fail, everything we tried to build, every bit of truth we tried to speak, it all disappears. Lucien wins. The network continues. Nothing changes. That's the risk. Then why take it? Kale thought about that. About all the choices that had led him here. About the 13-year-old girl locked in a basement while he signed manifests upstairs. About the 12 years he'd spent running from truth because facing it seemed impossible. Because someone has to, he said simply. Because if not us, then who? Because the alternative is living the rest of my life knowing I had a chance to do something that mattered and chose safety instead. Seraphine wiped at her eyes. All right, then let's do it. Let's find that ship and burn everything down. The commitment in her voice was absolute. Kyle called Marcus. Get up here. We need to plan an operation that's probably going to get us all killed. Traits. Marcus listened to the proposal with an expression that cycled through disbelief, horror, and resigned acceptance in about 90 seconds. You want to intercept a cargo ship, he said slowly. In open water. Board it. Document evidence of human trafficking. Then broadcast that evidence live to media outlets before anyone can shut us down. Yes. Using what resources? We're not the Navy. We don't have boats capable of intercepting cargo vessels. We don't have tactical teams trained for maritime operations. We don't even know exactly where the ship is. Can you find out? Maybe. Shipping manifests are public record. If I can identify the vessel, I can track its position using AIS data. How long? Few hours. Maybe less. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. But even if I find it, boarding a moving cargo ship is a military-level operation. We'd need fast boats, climbing equipment, weapons, people willing to die for this. I'm willing to die for this. That's not reassuring. Seraphine stood. What if we don't board it in open water? What if we wait until it docks and then expose what's inside before they can unload? Too late, Kael said. By the time it docks, Lucien will have security in place. Police cooperation. Official channels to delay any inspection. We'd never get close enough. Then we're back to the boarding option, which is suicide. Not if we do it smart. Kael turned to Marcus. You said you have contacts from your Marine days, people who do private security, maritime operations. Some, but most of them work legitimate contracts. They're not going to risk their licenses for... Offer them enough money and they will. Everyone has a price. Marcus stared at him. You're serious about this? Dead serious. And if it goes wrong, if people die, then we die trying to stop something worse. The room fell silent. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the gray afternoon. When he turned back, his expression was grim. I'll make some calls, he said, Pat. See who's available and what they'd need. But Kael, this is beyond dangerous. This is stepping outside every legal protection you have. If we do this and get caught, there's no FBI immunity deal, no cooperation agreement, just federal charges for piracy, kidnapping, armed assault, and whatever else the prosecutors can dream up. I know. And you're okay with that? Kael thought about Agent Cross's face when she'd been ordered to shut down the investigation. Thought about Lucien's voice explaining how the system was bought and paid for. Thought about Seraphine sitting in the basement while he signed manifests upstairs, convinced nothing would ever change. Yeah, he said, I'm okay with that. Marcus nodded once. All right, give me 4 hours. I'll have a plan or I'll have proof this is impossible. Either way, we'll know where we stand. He left. Kael and Seraphine stood alone in the office while afternoon light faded toward evening outside. This is really happening, Seraphine said quietly. Yeah. We're actually going to try this. Yeah. She looked at him. I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we board that ship and expose what's inside, my life changes forever. Not just my privacy, my safety, my ability to ever have a normal existence. The moment my face appears on camera, the moment my story goes public, I become a symbol, a cause, a representative of every trafficking victim who never got justice. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry that. You don't have to do this, Kael said. You can walk away right now. Leave Seattle. Start over somewhere Lucien can't find you. I'll give you money, new identity, whatever you need. And then what? I spend the rest of my life hiding while you either die trying to stop the network or surrender and become complicit again? She shook her head. No, I didn't survive 3 years in hell just to run away when things got hard. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. It's going to cost you everything. I know, but maybe some things are worth the price. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd chosen to walk into fire together because the alternative was living in cages built from their own fears. Kael's phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. But this time, it wasn't Lucien. The message contained a single photograph, a shipping manifest with vessel details, route information, and estimated arrival times. Below it, 3 words. North Pacific Valor. Docking, 62 hours. No signature, no explanation, just information. Who sent that? Seraphine asked. Kael stared at the screen, his mind racing through possibilities. Then it hit him. Agent Cross? What? She couldn't help us officially, but she could send us the information we need to help ourselves. The ship name, the timeline, everything Marcus would have spent hours trying to find. You think she's hoping we'll do something she can't? I think she's giving us a chance to finish what she started. Or die trying. Seraphine looked at the photograph on his phone, proof that even inside a corrupt system, some people still wanted to do the right thing, even if they had to do it in shadows. Then we better not waste it, she said. Cale forwarded the information to Marcus with a single-word message. Go. Outside, darkness settled over Seattle like a burial shroud. And somewhere in the North Pacific, a cargo ship carrying human cargo moved closer to port, completely unaware that the trap waiting for it had just changed from law enforcement to something far more dangerous, desperate people with nothing left to lose. Marcus returned at midnight with a plan that sounded like a suicide mission dressed up in tactical language. I found a team, he said, spreading maps across Kael's desk. 6 contractors, all former military, all willing to work off books for the right price. How much? $2 million, cash, half up front. Done. What else? Fast boats. RHIBs, rigid hull inflatable boats, capable of intercepting a cargo vessel in open water. I know a guy who runs maritime security training. He can provide 2 boats, full equipment, no questions asked. Cost? Another $1 million. Fine. Marcus looked at him. You understand you're burning through your liquid assets like they're toilet paper, right? Between the boats, the team, and the logistics, you're looking at $4 million for an operation that has maybe a 30% chance of success. What's the other 70%? We die. We get arrested. We fail to find anything incriminating, and the whole thing becomes an expensive embarrassment. I'll take 30%. Marcus nodded grimly and continued. The intercept happens here. He pointed to a spot on the map 50 miles off the Washington coast. North Pacific Valor follows a shipping lane that brings it within range of fast boats launched from Westport. We'll have a 6-hour window to intercept before it enters territorial waters and becomes untouchable. What happens after we board? That's where it gets complicated. We need documentation, video evidence that can't be dismissed or covered up, which means someone has to go inside the cargo holds, find whatever's hidden there, and broadcast it live. I'll do it, Kael said. No, you won't. You'll be running operations from the boat. I'll go inside. Marcus, this is non-negotiable. You're paying for this operation. I'm running it. That means I make tactical decisions, not you. Marcus's expression was iron. Besides, you're more valuable alive and able to testify about what we find. I'm expendable. That's bullshit. That's reality. Accept it or find someone else. Kael wanted to argue, but knew Marcus was right. He'd spent 12 years behind a desk. Marcus had spent years in combat zones. If this operation went sideways, having a trained operator inside the ship meant the difference between mission failure and total catastrophe. Fine, Kael said. But I'm on one of the boats. I'm not sitting on shore while you risk your life. Deal. Seraphine had been quiet during the entire briefing. Now she spoke up. What about me? Both men turned. You stay here, Marcus said. Safe, protected, as far from this clusterfuck as possible. No. Seraphine. No, she repeated, her voice hard. I'm not staying behind while you two play hero. This is my fight as much as yours. More, actually. Those people on that ship, whoever they are, they're me 13 years ago. I'm not letting them disappear into the same machine without doing everything I can to stop it. You don't have tactical training, Marcus argued. You'd be a liability in a combat situation. Then I won't be in a combat situation. I'll stay on the boat. But I'm coming. And if you find people inside those cargo holds, I want to be the first face they see. Not armed men, not federal agents who might or might not help them. Me, someone who survived what they're going through. The logic was sound even if the risk was terrifying. Kael? Marcus looked at him. Your call. Kael studied Seraphine's face. The determination carved into every line, the absolute refusal to be left behind, the need to finally confront the machine that had destroyed her childhood on her own terms. She comes, he said. Marcus exhaled slowly. All right. Then we're looking at a 3-boat operation, 2 intercept vessels with tactical teams, one support boat with communications equipment and medical supplies. Seraphine stays on the support boat unless situation allows otherwise. When do we leave? Tomorrow night. That gives us 1 day to prep equipment, brief the team, and get into position. North Pacific Valor enters our intercept window at 0300 the following morning. Dark, cold, maximum difficulty. Perfect. Marcus started gathering his maps. One more thing. Even if this works, even if we find evidence and broadcast it, we're committing multiple federal crimes, piracy, unlawful boarding, probably a dozen maritime violations I don't even know about. The moment this goes public, we become criminals, wanted by the same authorities we're trying to force into action. I know. Just making sure you understand there's no coming back from this. No legal protection, no immunity deals. We do this. We burn every bridge we have. Good. I'm tired of bridges that lead nowhere. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once and left. Seraphine approached the desk and looked down at the maps. Coastline marked with intercept coordinates, shipping lanes traced in red ink, the vast emptiness of the North Pacific waiting to swallow them whole. We're really doing this, she said. Yeah. We're going to war with a system that owns the referees, the lawyers, and most of the judges. Yeah. And our plan is to commit crimes so public and so documented that they can't be ignored or covered up. That's the idea. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. Then she started laughing, soft at first, then building into something that sounded half hysterical, half liberated. What's funny? Kyle asked. Nothing. Everything. The fact that our last resort is becoming pirates. The fact that the only way to stop human trafficking is to break every law designed to prevent it. The fact that doing the right thing requires becoming criminals. Is it funny or tragic? Both. Maybe that's the only appropriate response. Cale felt exhaustion crashing over him like waves. 24 hours ago, he'd walked into an FBI office expecting justice. Now he was planning maritime piracy with a team of mercenaries and a woman who had every reason to hate him. You should get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be hell. Tomorrow's already here. She was right. The clock had just passed midnight, less than 50 hours until North Pacific Valor entered the intercept window. 50 hours to prepare for an operation that would either expose the network or get them all killed. 50 hours until they learned whether courage mattered more than power, or whether power always won in the end. Seraphine headed for the door, then stopped. Kyle? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not giving up, for choosing to fight even when the system proved it was rigged, for being willing to lose everything instead of becoming complicit again. I haven't won yet. No, but you chose to try, and that's more than most people ever do. She left him alone in his office with maps and plans and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. Cale stood at the window, watching darkness swallow the city whole, and thought about the girl in the basement 13 years ago, terrified and certain she would die, while he signed manifests upstairs looking bored. I'm coming for you, he whispered to whatever ghost still haunted that memory. I'm coming for all of you. Then he pulled out his phone and started making arrangements that would either redeem him or destroy him. By dawn, there would be no turning back. By dawn, they would be committed to a path that led either to exposure and justice or death and silence. And standing there between ruin and possibility, Kyle Verreau finally understood that some cages could only be opened from the outside. Some truths could only be spoken by people willing to burn for them, and some battles could only be won by those with nothing left to lose. The drive to Westport took 3 hours through darkness so complete it felt like the world had ended beyond the headlights. Cale sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's truck, watching rain streak across the windshield, while his pulse hammered a rhythm that had nothing to do with coffee and everything to do with fear he couldn't afford to acknowledge. Behind them, 2 more vehicles followed, SUVs carrying the tactical team Marcus had assembled. 6 contractors who'd agreed to commit federal crimes for money and the slim possibility of doing something that mattered. Cale hadn't met any of them yet, hadn't wanted to see their faces until absolutely necessary, because seeing them made this real in ways his mind kept trying to deny. Seraphine sat in the back seat, staring out her own window at the blackness rushing past. She hadn't spoken since they left Seattle, just sat there breathing carefully like someone trying not to hyperventilate, fingers pressed against the glass hard enough to leave marks. You can still back out, Kyle said without turning around. No, I can't. Yes, you can. We drop you at a hotel in Aberdeen. You wait. If this works, we come back for you. If it doesn't, you disappear. I said no. The finality in her voice killed further argument. Marcus's phone buzzed in the center console. He glanced at the screen while keeping one hand on the wheel. Team leader confirming equipment load, he said. 2 RHIBs fueled and ready. Communications gear tested. Medical supplies staged. We're on schedule. What about weapons? Kyle asked. Everyone's armed. Suppressed carbines, sidearms, non-lethal options if situation allows. But Kyle, if we encounter resistance on that ship, people might die. You need to be prepared for that. I am. Are you? Because there's a difference between being willing to risk your own life and being willing to watch someone else bleed out because of decisions you made. Cale thought about the manifests he'd signed 15 years ago. Thought about all the people who'd bled and died and disappeared because of logistics he'd authorized without asking questions. Thought about Seraphine locked in a basement while he looked bored. I'm prepared, he said quietly. They reached Westport just after 2 in the morning. The small fishing town slept beneath heavy clouds that pressed down like wet concrete. Marcus navigated through empty streets to a private marina where boats rocked against docks in darkness, broken only by scattered security lights. A man stood waiting near the water, tall, weathered, wearing a waterproof jacket that had seen better decades. He approached as they parked. You Marcus? His voice carried the rough edges of someone who'd spent years shouting over engine noise. Yeah, you must be Donnelly. That's me. Donnelly glanced at the SUVs pulling in behind them. Your team? Yeah. They know what they're getting into? They know enough. Donnelly nodded once. Boats are ready. Fuel topped off. Navigation systems programmed with intercept coordinates. But I gotta tell you, conditions are shit. Swells running 12 to 15 feet. Visibility near zero. This is not a night anyone should be on the water. We don't have a choice. Everyone's got a choice. You're just making a bad one. Donnelly pulled out a handheld GPS unit. Target vessel is here. He pointed to a blinking dot on the screen, moving at 14 knots on a heading that brings it through your intercept window in approximately 90 minutes. You launch in 20, run hard for 45, you'll be in position with time to spare. What happens if we miss the window? Kyle asked. Donnelly looked at him like he was stupid. Then you don't intercept. Ship enters territorial waters and becomes the Coast Guard's problem, which means your problem becomes impossible. We won't miss it. Sure. Just like you won't capsize in 15-foot swells or get shot by whatever security that cargo ship is carrying. Confidence. I like that in clients who pay cash. The tactical team started climbing out of their vehicles. Cale finally saw them clearly in the security lights. 6 hard-faced men who moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of violence. They wore dark tactical gear and carried equipment bags that probably contained enough firepower to start a small war. One of them approached Marcus. Older than the others, maybe 50, with gray stubble and eyes that had seen too many things to be impressed by anything. We ready? He asked. Yeah, this is Kyle Viro. He's running the operation. No, he's not. The man's tone allowed zero argument. I'm running tactical. He's running objectives. Big difference. Fair enough, Cale said. What's your name? Graves. That's all you need to know. He gestured to his team. We go in fast, secure the deck, locate cargo holds, document whatever we find, extract before security responds or authorities arrive. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. No. But treating it like it's complicated gets people killed. So we keep it simple. Follow orders. Don't be a hero. Let professionals do professional work. Kyle wanted to argue but recognized the logic. These men knew maritime assault. He knew spreadsheets and construction contracts. Letting them run tactics while he focused on objectives made sense. All right, he said. Your show. Graves nodded once, then turned to his team. Load up. We launch in 15. The next 15 minutes dissolved into controlled chaos. Equipment bags transferred to boats. Weapons checked and rechecked. Communications gear tested. Graves briefed his team in low voices while Donnelly made final adjustments to navigation systems. Cale stood near the water's edge, watching waves slap against dock pilings, with enough force to shake the wooden planks beneath his feet. The ocean stretched away into darkness that felt infinite and hostile. Somewhere out there, a cargo ship carrying human cargo moved closer. Somewhere out there, the moment of truth approached like a freight train he couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. Seraphine appeared beside him. "Second thoughts?" she asked. "About 100 of them." "Me too." They stood in silence for a moment, watching darkness swallow the marina. "When we find them," Seraphine said quietly, "the people on that ship, what happens after? After we document everything and broadcast it and force the truth into daylight, what happens to them?" "They get help, medical care, trauma counseling, legal protection." "From who? The same system that shut down our FBI confession? The same authorities that take orders from people who profit from trafficking?" Cale didn't have a good answer. "I keep thinking about what comes after," Seraphine continued. "We expose the network. We burn Lucien and Valicrest. We destroy the infrastructure. But the survivors, the actual human beings we're supposedly saving, they still have to live in a world that allowed this to happen. They still have to navigate systems that failed them. They still have to carry trauma that never fully heals." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying this is more complicated than rescue, more complicated than exposure and justice. The people on that ship aren't just victims waiting to be saved. They're survivors who'll spend years trying to rebuild lives that were stolen. And I don't know if what we're doing tonight actually helps them or just creates a different kind of nightmare." Kyle looked at her. "You want to back out?" "No. I want you to understand that this isn't a clean victory, even if it works. It's messy and complicated, and some of those people might never recover. But we do it anyway, not because it fixes everything, because it's better than doing nothing." "Time to load," Marcus called from the boats. They walked down the dock together. 2 RHIBs waited, engines rumbling like caged predators. The tactical team had already boarded the first boat, 6 armed men checking equipment with mechanical efficiency. The second boat held Marcus at the helm, communications gear stacked in waterproof cases, space for Kyle and Seraphine. Cale climbed aboard, legs unsteady as the boat rocked beneath him. Seraphine followed, immediately grabbing a handhold to steady herself. The ocean smell hit harder here, salt and diesel and something ancient that reminded him how small humans were compared to the forces they were about to challenge. "Life jackets on," Marcus ordered. "Strap tight. If you go in the water tonight, you've got maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia kills you. Less if you panic." Kyle pulled on a life jacket, fingers fumbling with straps while his pulse hammered. Beside him, Seraphine did the same, her face pale in the dim light. "Everyone ready?" Graves called from the lead boat. "Ready," Marcus confirmed. "Then let's go get stupid." The RHIBs pulled away from the dock in perfect synchronization, engines growling as they accelerated toward open water. Within minutes, the marina lights faded behind them, swallowed by darkness so complete it felt like traveling through a void. The only reference points were running lights on the lead boat and the GPS screen glowing in Marcus's hands. The swells hit them as soon as they cleared the harbor mouth. The RHIB climbed a wave that felt impossibly steep, hung at the crest for a sickening moment, then dropped into the trough with enough force to rattle Kael's teeth. Freezing spray exploded across the bow, soaking everyone instantly despite their waterproof gear. Seraphine made a sound that might have been fear or nausea or both. "Hold on," Marcus shouted over the engine roar and crashing waves. "It gets worse." He wasn't lying. For the next 40 minutes, the RHIB pounded through seas that seemed designed to kill them. Waves came from impossible angles, slamming into the hull with enough force to throw Kyle against his restraints. Salt spray filled his mouth and nose. His hands ached from gripping the safety rail. Beside him, Seraphine had gone silent, face pressed against her knees, breathing in short gasps. Marcus piloted with grim concentration, one hand on the wheel, the other holding the GPS, eyes locked on the screen while the ocean tried to murder them all. 10 minutes to intercept point, he shouted. Kyle forced his eyes open and looked ahead. Through the spray and darkness, he could make out running lights. The lead boat still intact, still driving forward through conditions that should have sent them back to shore. Then new lights appeared in the distance, massive, brilliant white against the black sky. The cargo ship. "Target acquired," Marcus said into his radio. "Moving to intercept positions." The RHIBs split apart, engines screaming as they accelerated on converging courses toward the massive vessel. As they got closer,
The true scale of what they were attempting became horrifyingly clear.
North Pacific Valor rose from the ocean like a steel cliff, 600 feet of cargo ship riding swells that would capsize the RHIBs without noticing. Massive shipping containers stacked on deck created geometric shapes that blocked starlight. The ship's wake churned white foam that looked like it could swallow the small boat's whole. "How the hell do we board that thing?" Kyle shouted. "Very carefully," Marcus replied. Graves's voice came through the radio, calm despite the chaos. "Lead boat executing approach. Support boat hold position until deck is secured." The first RHIB surged forward, matching the cargo ship's speed while running parallel to its hull. From this distance, Kyle could see the tactical team preparing boarding equipment: pneumatic grappling hooks, rope ladders, climbing gear designed for exactly this kind of assault. The first grapple fired with a muffled thump, barely audible, over the engines and waves. It sailed up toward the deck rail, trailing rope behind it, then caught with a metallic clang. Within seconds, 3 more lines secured. The tactical team started climbing, 6 men ascending wet rope while the ocean tried to shake them loose like parasites. Kyle watched in horrified fascination as they reached the deck rail and hauled themselves over. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Graves's voice crackled through the radio. "Deck secure. No resistance encountered. Support boat proceed to boarding position." Marcus gunned the engine, bringing their RHIB alongside the massive hull. The rope ladders hung there, swaying in the wind like the most terrifying invitation Kyle had ever received. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said. "Yes, I do." "Then move fast. The longer we're alongside, the more likely someone notices." Kyle grabbed the nearest rope ladder and started climbing. His hands were numb from cold and fear. The rope felt slick with spray. The ladder swung wildly with each wave, slamming him against the steel hull hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. Below him, the ocean waited like an open mouth. Above him, the deck seemed impossibly far away. He climbed anyway, hand over hand, foot after foot, not thinking about falling or drowning or all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Just climbing because stopping meant surrender, and he'd spent 12 years surrendering to fear. His hands reached the deck rail. He pulled himself over and collapsed onto cold steel, gasping for air that tasted like salt and adrenaline. Graves appeared above him. "On your feet. We're on a clock." Kyle stood on shaking legs. The cargo ship's deck stretched away in both directions, a metal landscape of shipping containers and machinery bathed in sodium lights that turned everything amber and orange. The ship rode swells with massive, ponderous movements that made the deck tilt at sickening angles. Marcus came over the rail next, followed by Seraphine, who looked like she'd just climbed out of her own grave. "Everyone accounted for," Graves said into his radio, proceeding to cargo holds. The tactical team moved with practiced efficiency, weapons up, scanning for threats while advancing toward the superstructure. Kale followed, trying to keep pace while his legs remembered how to work on solid ground that wouldn't stop moving. They reached a heavy steel door marked with Mandarin characters Kale couldn't read. One of the team members produced bolt cutters and went to work on the lock. 30 seconds later, the door swung open onto a stairwell that descended into the ship's guts. "KL and Seraphine stay topside with 2 guards, Graves ordered. "Rest of us sweep below. We find the cargo, document it, get out." "Questions?" "How long?" Marcus asked. 20 minutes. After that, risk of discovery becomes unacceptable. 20 minutes to find evidence of human trafficking inside a 600-foot cargo ship. 20 minutes to document something horrible enough to force authorities into action. 20 minutes to either validate everything they'd risked or prove this whole operation was suicide disguised as strategy. "Go," Kyle said. Graves and 4 of his team disappeared down the stairwell. Marcus went with them, carrying a camera and communications gear. 2 tactical operators remained topside, weapons trained on the approaches while Kyle and Seraphine waited. The minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. Wind howled across the deck. Waves crashed against the hull. The ship's engines thrummed beneath their feet like the heartbeat of some massive beast. Kyle's radio remained silent except for occasional static bursts. "What if there's nothing down there?" Seraphine asked quietly. "Then we've committed maritime piracy for nothing. And if there is something, then we've started a war we can't win conventionally. We just have to make sure the opening shot matters." More silence. Then Marcus's voice exploded through the radio, tight with something between horror and rage. We found them. Jesus Christ, Cale, we found them. Cale's heart stopped. How many? 37, maybe 40, packed into containers modified with ventilation and basic sanitation. Men, women, children, some of them, Marcus's voice cracked. Some of them aren't conscious. Medical emergency. We need extraction now. Can you document it? I'm filming everything, but Cale, we can't just leave them here. These people need immediate medical attention. Some of them might not survive another hour. Cale looked at Seraphine. Her face had gone white. What do we do? She whispered. This was the decision that mattered. This was the moment where theory met reality and people either committed to their principles or found reasons to walk away. They could document the evidence and extract clean, broadcast the footage, and force authorities to respond while keeping themselves safely distant from consequences. Maintain deniability, minimize legal exposure, or they could stay. They could evacuate survivors. They could turn this from a documentation mission into a rescue operation that would absolutely, definitely, irreversibly destroy any chance of avoiding federal prosecution. Graves, Kyle said into the radio, can we evacuate them? Negative. We don't have transport capacity. The RHIBs might hold a dozen people maximum in these seas. We'd need Coast Guard assistance, which means calling authorities, which means this whole operation becomes public immediately and we lose control of the narrative. What about the cargo ship itself? Can we divert it to port? You want to hijack a cargo vessel? I want those people off this ship alive. Then you're talking about piracy. Full scale, no going back, federal prison for life piracy. Marcus's voice cut in. KL, I'm looking at a kid who can't be older than 9, unconscious, breathing but barely. If we leave her here, she dies. If we call the Coast Guard, maybe they arrive in time, maybe they don't. And either way, we get arrested the moment they show up. Kyle closed his eyes. Every rational calculation said extract with the footage. Every practical consideration said minimize exposure. Every survival instinct said don't make this worse than it already was. But standing on that freezing deck with wind cutting through his clothes and salt spray stinging his eyes, Kyle finally understood something fundamental. Redemption wasn't about making smart choices. It was about making the choice you could live with. We're not leaving them, he said. Kyle, Graves started. We're not leaving them, Kyle repeated, his voice hard. I've spent 15 years making practical decisions that let people suffer so I could stay comfortable. I'm done with that. We get those people off this ship, all of them. I don't care what it costs. Silence crackled across the radio. Then Graves's voice came back, carrying something that might have been respect. All right. Then we do this properly. Marcus, keep documenting. I need 2 team members securing the bridge. We're taking control of this vessel and diverting to the nearest port. Everyone else starts evacuating survivors to deck level for Coast Guard transfer. What about ship security? One of the team members asked. If they interfere, we deal with it. But our priority is getting civilians clear. Everything else is secondary. The radio exploded with acknowledgments as the tactical team shifted from documentation mode to full hijacking operation. Kale turned to Seraphine. You should get back on the RHIB. This is about to get very bad very fast. No. Seraphine, I said no. Those people down there, they're terrified, traumatized. The last thing they need is armed men dragging them onto a freezing deck. They need someone who understands, someone who survived. It's not safe. Nothing about this is safe. But I'm going down there anyway. She headed for the stairwell before Kyle could argue further. He followed. The stairs descended into a nightmare Kyle would never forget. The cargo hold stretched away in industrial darkness, broken by emergency lighting that turned everything sickly yellow. Modified shipping containers lined the walls, each one marked with alphanumeric codes that probably meant something to traffickers. Ventilation pipes snaked across the ceiling. The smell hit like a physical force. Sweat and fear and human waste and desperation concentrated into an atmosphere that made breathing feel like violence. Marcus stood near the nearest container, camera running, filming survivors being helped out by tactical team members who'd temporarily become first responders. The people emerging looked like ghosts, pale, malnourished, wrapped in thin blankets that wouldn't stop cold or trauma. Some walked on their own. Others needed support. A few had to be carried. Seraphine pushed past Kyle and approached the nearest survivor. A woman, maybe 20 years old, holding a child who stared at nothing with eyes too old for her face. "It's okay," Seraphine said, her voice gentle despite the chaos. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." The woman didn't respond, just held her child and shook. Kyle moved through the hold, trying to process what he was seeing. 37 people, 40 maybe, packed into containers designed for cargo, not humans, traveling thousands of miles across an ocean that would have killed them if something went wrong with ventilation or water supply, invisible to authorities, profitable to traffickers, reduced to inventory in a machine that turned suffering into spreadsheets. He'd helped build this machine. He'd authorized these shipments. He'd signed manifests that treated these people like furniture. The weight of it crushed him. "Kyle," Marcus grabbed his arm. "We have a problem." "What?" "Ship security just woke up. They're responding to our position, armed, and they're not coming to negotiate." Before Kale could respond, gunfire erupted somewhere above them, sharp cracks echoing through metal corridors followed by shouted commands in Mandarin and English. Graves's voice exploded through the radio. "Contact! We have armed resistance! All personnel prepare for combat engagement." The cargo hold descended into chaos. Survivors screamed. Tactical team members shifted from rescue mode to defensive positions. Marcus shoved Kyle toward cover behind a shipping container while pulling a sidearm from his jacket. "Stay down," he ordered. More gunfire. Closer now. Then the stairwell door burst open and 3 men in dark uniforms appeared, carrying assault rifles and expressions that promised violence. They saw the survivors, saw the tactical team, saw everything they needed to know about what was happening. One of them raised his weapon. Graves shot him first, 3 suppressed rounds that dropped the man before he could fire. The other 2 dove for cover, returning fire with unsuppressed weapons that turned the cargo hold into a thunderstorm of noise and ricochets. Kale pressed himself against cold steel, hands over his ears, while the world exploded around him. He'd never been in combat, never experienced actual violence beyond boardroom threats and legal battles. The noise was overwhelming. The smell of cordite burned his throat. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Beside him, a survivor, a teenage boy, crouched with his hands over his head, whispering words in a language Kale didn't understand. Prayers, maybe, or just sounds to fill the space where hope used to live. The firefight lasted maybe 90 seconds, but felt like hours. When silence finally returned, 3 ship security members lay dead or dying. One of Graves's team had taken a round to the shoulder but remained functional. The cargo hold reeked of blood and gunpowder and fear. "Status?" Graves barked into his radio. "Bridge secure," came the response. 2 security personnel neutralized. "We have control of ship systems." "Good. Divert to nearest port. Emergency speed. And somebody call the fucking Coast Guard because this situation just went from bad to catastrophic." Kyle stood on shaking legs. His ears rang. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. Around him, survivors huddled together, some crying, some silent, all of them caught in a nightmare that kept getting worse. Seraphine appeared through the smoke, blood on her hands from helping someone wounded, her face set in lines of absolute determination. "We need to get them topside," she said. "Now, before more security responds." "Can you move them?" "I can try." She started organizing survivors with a combination of gentle encouragement and firm direction that somehow worked despite language barriers and trauma. Within minutes, people were moving toward the stairwell, supporting each other, carrying children, helping those too weak to walk alone. Marcus stayed at Kyle's shoulder, camera still running, documenting everything. "This footage is going to change the world," he said quietly, "or get us killed." Both, probably. They helped evacuate survivors up the stairwell onto the cargo deck, where freezing wind hit like a hammer. The ship had changed course, turning toward the Washington coast, with engines running at speeds that made the entire vessel vibrate. Dawn was starting to break on the eastern horizon, gray light bleeding through clouds like something being born in pain. Graves approached, blood on his tactical vest, expression grim. "Coast Guard is inbound, ETA 40 minutes. They're bringing medical support and federal agents, which means we have 40 minutes before this becomes official and we all get arrested." "Can we extract before they arrive?" Kyle asked. "Maybe, But extracting means leaving these people with ship security and hoping the Coast Guard shows up in time. You willing to take that risk? Cale looked at the survivors huddled on deck. 40 human beings who'd just escaped hell, only to find themselves on a hijacked cargo ship in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by people who'd just killed security personnel to free them. No, he said. We stay. We make sure the Coast Guard takes custody. We make sure these people get actual help, not just transferred back into the system that failed them. Then we're getting arrested, all of us. Maritime piracy, unlawful boarding, assault, probably murder charges for the security personnel we killed. You understand what you're committing to? Yeah. And you're okay with it? Cale thought about the manifests he'd signed, the basements he'd ignored, the 12 years he'd spent running from responsibility. Thought about Agent Cross shutting down his confession because someone made a phone call. Thought about every time he'd chosen comfort over courage. Yeah, he said. I'm okay with it. Graves nodded once. All right then. Let's make sure this matters. The next 30 minutes moved like a fever dream. Medical supplies distributed. Survivors wrapped in thermal blankets. Marcus's footage transmitted via satellite uplink to media outlets Cale had contacted before the operation. Journalists he trusted to publish without censorship or delay. Insurance that even if they all got arrested, the truth would still reach daylight. Seraphine moved among the survivors like a shepherd, speaking gentle words in English that probably didn't need translation. Cale watched her comfort a young girl who couldn't stop crying, watched her hold the hand of an elderly man who looked like he'd given up hope years ago, watched her become the person she needed 13 years ago when she was locked in a different basement, waiting for rescue that never came. Then the Coast Guard cutter appeared on the horizon, massive, official, bristling with authority and weapons and all the institutional power that had failed them yesterday but might, just might, have to face the truth today. The cutter approached with searchlights cutting through morning gray, illuminating the cargo ship like evidence at a crime scene. Amplified voices ordered them to stand down, surrender weapons, prepare for boarding. Graves gathered his team. We do this peacefully, weapons on deck, hands visible. No one does anything stupid. We've accomplished the mission. Now we accept consequences. The tactical team set their weapons down with military precision. Carbines, sidearms, everything arranged neatly like surrender executed professionally. Cale stood beside Seraphine at the deck rail, watching Coast Guard personnel prepare boarding equipment. His empire was over, his reputation destroyed, his freedom measured in minutes. Any regrets? Seraphine asked. Hundreds. But not this. Good. The Coast Guard boarded with overwhelming force, armed personnel securing the deck, while medics rushed to survivors. Within minutes, the cargo ship teamed with federal agents documenting everything, photographing evidence, taking statements from survivors who'd just become witnesses in what would probably become the biggest trafficking case in years. A Coast Guard commander approached Cale, flanked by armed personnel. Cale Viro? Yeah. You're under arrest for maritime piracy, unlawful boarding of a commercial vessel, assault, and conspiracy to commit federal crimes. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Cale complied. Cold metal handcuffs locked around his wrists with a finality that felt like punctuation on a sentence that had started 15 years ago. Behind him, tactical team members received the same treatment. Marcus, Graves, all of them processed with mechanical efficiency. Then Seraphine. Seraphine Vale, the commander asked. Yes. I'm placing you under arrest as well. On what charges? Conspiracy to commit piracy, aiding and abetting, possibly more depending on investigation results. Seraphine extended her wrists. Then you better make sure those survivors get real help, because if they just disappear back into the system, if they get deported or detained or lost in bureaucracy, I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure everyone knows the Coast Guard failed them twice. The commander's expression flickered with something that might have been respect or might have been annoyance. They'll get help, he said. You have my word. Words are cheap. I want accountability. So do I. Now turn around. Seraphine turned. The handcuffs clicked shut. As they were led toward the Coast Guard cutter for transport to federal custody, Cale looked back at the cargo ship one final time. Medics worked among survivors. Agents photographed containers that had held human cargo. Dawn light illuminated everything in shades of gray and gold that made the whole scene look like something from a documentary about crimes people wished weren't real. Marcus appeared beside him, also in handcuffs.
Footage uploaded, he said quietly. Every major outlet. It'll start hitting news cycles within the hour. Will it matter? I don't know, but at least we tried.
They boarded the Coast Guard cutter and were processed into holding cells below deck. Small rooms with bunks and locked doors and the smell of diesel fuel and institutional paint. Cale sat on his bunk and stared at gray walls while the cutter's engines thrummed beneath him, carrying him toward federal prosecution and everything that came after. He'd destroyed his empire, ruined his reputation, committed crimes that would probably put him in prison for years. But somewhere above deck, 40 human beings breathed free air for the first time in months or years. Somewhere in Seattle, media outlets prepared to broadcast footage that couldn't be censored or controlled. Somewhere beyond his cell, the machinery of justice ground slowly forward whether it wanted to or not. And sitting in that cold cell with handcuffs still locked around his wrists, Kael Verreau finally understood something fundamental about redemption. It wasn't about being forgiven. It wasn't about making amends. It was about choosing truth over comfort, about choosing courage over survival, about finally becoming someone who valued human life more than personal safety. The cell door opened. A federal agent appeared, not Agent Cross, someone new, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that gave nothing away. Mr. Verreau, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. We need to talk. About what? About the footage your team uploaded. About the 43 survivors we just took into custody. About Lucien Dragor and Ronan Valcrest, and a trafficking network that apparently has enough institutional protection to shut down investigations. She paused. And about whether you're willing to cooperate in exchange for consideration regarding charges. What kind of consideration? That depends on what you can give us. But Mr. Verreau, the footage you broadcast this morning, it's already been viewed 3 million times. Major outlets are running stories. Politicians are demanding investigations. Whatever protection Lucien had yesterday is eroding by the hour. She held up her tablet, showing news headlines that screamed about trafficking and corruption and billionaire vigilantes. You've started something. The question is whether you're willing to help us finish it. Kael looked at the headlines, saw his face, saw Seraphine's face, saw survivors being led to safety while Coast Guard personnel documented everything. I'll cooperate, he said, on one condition. What? The survivors. Every single one. They get real help, real protection, not just processing and deportation, actual support, medical care, trauma counseling, legal advocacy, everything they need to rebuild. We can arrange. I want it in writing. I want oversight. I want accountability. Because if they disappear into bureaucracy, if they get lost in the system, this all meant nothing. Agent Chen studied him for a long moment. All right, she finally said. I'll make sure it's part of the cooperation agreement. But Mr. Verreau, you just committed serious federal crimes. Even with cooperation, even with the survivor's testimony, you're looking at prison time. I know. And you're okay with that? Kael thought about the question. Thought about the girl in the basement 13 years ago. Thought about the manifests he'd signed. Thought about 12 years of running from responsibility. Yeah, he said. I'm okay with that. Then let's get started. She pulled out a recorder, and Kael began confessing again. But this time, someone was actually listening. The interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and fluorescent lights that had been running too long. Kael sat across from Agent Chen at a metal table bolted to the floor, his hands free from handcuffs now, but still bearing the red marks where the metal had pressed into his wrists for 3 hours during transport and processing. Outside the small window, Seattle's skyline rose against gray afternoon clouds. A city that looked the same as it had yesterday, even though everything beneath the surface had shifted. Agent Chen set a folder on the table between them, thick, heavy with documentation. Let's start with Lucien Dragor, she said. You've known him for 15 years, tell me everything. Kael told her. For 6 hours, he recounted every meeting, every conversation, every transaction that connected him to the Pacific Corridor network. He described warehouse systems and shipping routes and the architecture of complicity that turned human beings into inventory. He named names, Some living, some dead, some still operating inside the system pretending to be legitimate. Agent Chen recorded everything with mechanical precision, occasionally stopping him to clarify details or request documentation. Other agents came and went, bringing files and photos and evidence that corroborated pieces of Kael's confession. The interrogation felt less like an attack and more like an archaeological dig, carefully excavating layers of buried crimes with tools designed to preserve context. When they reached the present day, Agent Chen pulled out a series of photographs showing Lucian at various locations over the past week: restaurants, private clubs, a marina where expensive boats rocked against their moorings. "We've been tracking him since your footage hit the news," she said. "He hasn't run, hasn't tried to flee the country, just continues operating like nothing happened." "That's his play," Kael said. "Act innocent. Let lawyers handle everything. Trust that institutional protection holds." Will it hold? I don't know. 24 hours ago, I would have said yes. Now? He gestured toward the window where Seattle continued breathing. "Your investigation got shut down yesterday. Today you're sitting here taking my confession. Something changed." Agent Chen's expression tightened. "What changed is 3 million people watched footage of trafficking survivors being rescued from a cargo ship. What changed is every major news outlet is running stories about corruption and institutional failure. What changed is politicians can't ignore this anymore without destroying their careers. So public pressure matters more than phone calls from powerful people. Sometimes, when the pressure gets loud enough." She paused. "But that doesn't mean Lucian goes down easy. He's already lawyered up. So is Ronan Valcrest. They're claiming ignorance about the cargo, about the network, about everything, saying they were victims of rogue elements inside their organizations." "That's bullshit." "Probably, but it's bullshit backed by expensive lawyers and institutional connections, which means building a case that actually sticks requires more than your testimony. It requires documentation, financial records, witness testimony from people inside the network willing to turn." "What about the survivors from the ship? Can they testify?" "Some of them, but most are too traumatized, too scared, too uncertain about their legal status to risk cooperation. And defense attorneys will tear them apart on cross-examination, make them look unreliable, claim they were willing participants or economic migrants lying about trafficking to avoid deportation." The casual brutality of it landed like a punch. "So what do you need from me?" Kael asked. "Everything you haven't told me yet. The connections you're still protecting, the people you're still afraid to name, the evidence you held back because some part of you still hopes for a deal that lets you walk away clean." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Mr. Vero, you've been cooperative, but I can tell you're still calculating, still weighing what you can afford to lose. And I need you to understand something fundamental. You already lost everything. Your empire is gone, your reputation destroyed. The only question now is whether you use what's left to actually make a difference, or whether you keep playing games and hoping for miracles that aren't coming." The honesty cut deeper than any threat. Kael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs of Lucian spread across the table. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, an action that made Agent Chen's hand twitch toward her sidearm, and pulled out a flash drive. "What's that?" she asked. "Insurance I've been carrying for 12 years. Financial records, encrypted communications, offshore account information, everything that connects Lucian to the network, everything that proves Ronan Valcrest isn't just a philanthropist, but the primary financier of trafficking infrastructure across the Pacific Rim." He set the flash drive on the table. "I kept it because I thought someday I might need leverage. Turns out the only thing it's good for is telling the truth." Agent Chen picked up the drive carefully, like it might explode. "Why didn't you give this to Agent Cross yesterday?" "Because yesterday I still thought I could control the outcome. Thought I could confess and cooperate and somehow walk away with pieces of my life intact. But standing on that cargo ship this morning, watching survivors who'd been reduced to inventory, I finally understood something." He met her eyes. "There's no controlled version of this. No surgical strike that takes down the bad guys while leaving me protected. The only way to actually destroy the network is to burn it all down, including myself." "You realize this drive probably implicates you in additional crimes." "Yeah. And you're giving it to me anyway." "Yeah." Agent Chen inserted the drive into her laptop and started reviewing files.
Her expression shifted as she scrolled through evidence, surprise giving way to grim satisfaction.
Jesus Christ, she muttered. This is everything. Shell companies, wire transfers, communications between Valicrest and offshore accounts, even connections to federal officials who blocked investigations. She looked up. Mr. Viro, this evidence doesn't just implicate Lucien and Valicrest. It implicates people inside the Justice Department, inside Homeland Security, potentially inside the FBI itself. I know, which means pursuing it creates massive complications, political shitstorms, internal investigations, people with power and influence fighting to bury this before it destroys their careers. Can you pursue it anyway? Agent Chen closed the laptop and sat back in her chair, studying him with an expression that mixed exhaustion and determination. I've been chasing trafficking networks for 8 years, she said quietly. I've watched investigations get shut down, watched evidence disappear, watched survivors get deported while traffickers walked free because someone made a phone call or filed the right paperwork. I've spent most of my career feeling like I'm fighting a war where the other side owns the referees. She paused. So yeah, I can pursue it. I will pursue it, even if it costs me my career, because someone has to. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This investigation is going to take months, maybe years, and there's no guarantee we win. Lucien and Valicrest have resources we can't match. They have lawyers who will drag this through courts until witnesses disappear or lose credibility. They have institutional protection that won't collapse just because we have evidence. She tapped the laptop. But we have this now. And we have your testimony. And we have 43 survivors who might, just might, be willing to speak once they feel safe enough. So we have a chance, a real chance. That's more than I've had in years. A knock on the door interrupted them. Another agent appeared, young, nervous-looking, carrying a tablet. Agent Chen, you need to see this. She took the tablet and her expression went rigid. What is it? Kael asked. Lucien Dragor just held a press conference. He's claiming you framed him. Says the cargo ship operation was a vigilante action by a disgraced billionaire trying to manufacture evidence against business rivals. He's threatening lawsuits, demanding your prosecution, calling you a terrorist. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Can he actually make that stick? Kael asked. Maybe. You did commit maritime piracy. You did hijack a cargo vessel. You did kill 3 security personnel during the boarding. Defense attorneys can spin that as vigilante violence regardless of what you found. Agent Chen set the tablet down. He's also claiming the survivors were willing economic migrants you convinced to lie about trafficking. Says you manipulated vulnerable people to create evidence for a personal vendetta. That's insane. That's strategy. He's trying to control the narrative before our investigation gains traction, trying to discredit you so thoroughly that nothing you say matters. She stood. Which means we need to move fast. Get charges filed before his PR campaign overwhelms the facts. Get survivors into protective custody before they can be intimidated or deported. Get this evidence to prosecutors who aren't compromised. How long? 72 hours. Maybe less. After that, the window closes and Lucien's version becomes the dominant story. She headed for the door. I need to brief the task force. You stay here. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make any statements. Just sit tight while we figure out how to stop this from becoming a complete disaster. She left. Kael sat alone in this interrogation room, staring at the photographs of Lucien spread across the table. Outside, the city continued moving, people going to work, eating lunch, living ordinary lives while the machinery of justice and corruption ground against each other like tectonic plates. His phone had been confiscated during processing, but through the window he could see the federal building's lobby where television screens displayed news coverage. Even from this distance, he could make out his own face plastered across CNN, Fox News, MSN, BC, every major outlet running variations of the same story. Billionaire vigilante attacks cargo ship. Trafficking rescue or terrorist action. Kael Viro. Hero or criminal? The narratives were already forming, already hardening into competing versions of truth that would battle in courts and media cycles and public opinion until one version won by exhaustion rather than accuracy. Hours passed. Agent Chen returned with bad news written across her face. Federal prosecutors are balking, she said. They don't want to move forward with charges against Lucien and Valicrest, until they have ironclad evidence. They're worried about political blowback, worried about losing high-profile cases, worried about everything except actually doing their jobs. So what happens? We keep building this case, keep documenting, keep hoping enough pressure builds that they can't ignore it anymore. She paused. But Kael, I need you to understand something. Even if we eventually get charges filed, even if we eventually get convictions, you're still going to prison. What you did on that cargo ship, it was the right thing morally, but it was still illegal. The best outcome for you is reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. But reduced doesn't mean eliminated. How long? 3 to 5 years? Maybe more depending on how prosecutors want to play it. 3 to 5 years. The number felt both impossibly long and strangely manageable. Less than what he deserved, more than what he'd hoped for. Exactly the kind of ambiguous compromise that defined justice in a system designed for complexity rather than clarity. Can I see Seraphine? He asked. Agent Chen hesitated. She's being held in a separate facility. Different charges, different circumstances. Is she okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally? She shrugged. She just relived her worst trauma in front of federal agents while being processed for crimes she committed trying to stop the same system that failed her 13 years ago. How okay can she be? I need to talk to her. That's not possible right now. Maybe later, after arraignment, after lawyers get involved and work out custody arrangements. Agent Chen softened slightly. But I can tell you she's asking about the survivors, demanding guarantees they get real help. She's still fighting even from inside a cell. That sounded exactly like Seraphine. The door opened again. This time a federal marshal appeared, carrying handcuffs. Time to move you to pretrial detention, he said. Arraignment is tomorrow morning. Until then, you're in federal custody at SeaTac. The handcuffs clicked shut around Kael's wrists for the second time that day. But SeaTac Federal Detention Center was exactly as grim as expected. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the institutional smell of cleaning chemicals, and despair. Kael was processed through intake, photographed, fingerprinted, issued orange jail scrubs that felt like surrender-made fabric. His cell was small, 8 by 10 feet. Bunk bolted to the wall. Metal toilet, narrow window that showed nothing except concrete courtyard and razor wire. He sat on the bunk and stared at gray walls while his mind spun through everything that had led here. 15 years of choices, 12 years of running. 1 week of finally facing what he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Night fell. The detention center quieted except for occasional sounds, doors clanging, voices echoing, the ambient noise of hundreds of people locked in boxes waiting for justice or mercy or just time to pass. Kael didn't sleep. Morning came gray and cold. The arraignment took place in a federal courthouse downtown, a massive building that smelled like marble and authority. Kael was transported in chains, processed through security, led into a courtroom where photographers and reporters packed every available seat. The judge was an older woman with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of bullshit humanity could produce and wasn't impressed by any of it. Mr. Vero, she said, reading from documents, you're charged with maritime piracy, unlawful boarding of a commercial vessel, assault, conspiracy, and approximately a dozen related federal offenses. How do you plead? Kael's public defender, a tired-looking woman who'd briefed him for exactly 15 minutes before the hearing, stood beside him. Guilty, Your Honor, Kael said. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. The judge banged her gavel for order. Mr. Vero, I need to ensure you understand what you're doing. You're pleading guilty to charges that carry significant prison time. You have the right to a trial. You have the right to force the prosecution to prove their case. Are you certain you want to waive those rights? Yes, Your Honor. Why? The question caught him off guard. Because I'm guilty, he said simply. I committed the crimes I'm charged with. I knew they were illegal when I did them. I made conscious choices that led here, and I accept responsibility for those choices. The judge studied him for a long moment. This court sees a lot of defendants, Mr. Vero. Most of them claim innocence. Most of them blame circumstances or other people or anything except their own decisions. You're the first person in 6 months to stand here and simply admit guilt. She paused. Given the unusual circumstances of this case, and given your cooperation with federal investigators, I'm ordering a full presentencing investigation. Bail is denied given flight risk and the severity of charges. You'll remain in federal custody pending sentencing. We'll reconvene in 90 days. OPC, OSV, OWTSIT. The gavel came down. Guards led Kyle back toward the holding cells while reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. As he passed through the courtroom doors, he caught sight of someone in the gallery. Seraphine. She sat near the back, flanked by federal marshals, wearing her own orange scrubs. Their eyes met for just a moment, a connection that held too much history to express in glances but tried anyway. Then she was gone, led away to her own arraignment, her own reckoning with a system that had failed her twice. The 90 days passed with agonizing slowness. Kyle spent them in detention, giving testimony to federal investigators, providing documentation, helping build cases against Lucien and Valicrest, and a dozen other people connected to the network. Agent Chen visited weekly, updating him on progress. The news was mixed. Lucien had been arrested but released on bail. Ronan Valicrest remained free, protected by lawyers who'd managed to distance him from direct evidence. Several mid-level traffickers had been indicted. The cargo ship's owners faced charges. But the institutional protection Kyle had hoped would collapse remained stubbornly intact. It's not enough, Agent Chen admitted during one visit. We're getting convictions on the edges. But the people at the center, the ones with real power and real protection, they're slipping through. What about the survivors? 23 of them agreed to testify. The others are too scared or too traumatized. We've placed them in protective custody, given them access to medical care and counseling. But Kyle? She leaned forward. They're terrified. They don't trust the system. They think we're going to deport them or lock them up or just abandon them once the news cycle moves on. And given how this system has treated trafficking survivors historically, they're not wrong to be afraid. Can you protect them? I'm trying, but I'm one agent, one task force, fighting against bureaucracy and political pressure and people who want this story to disappear. She paused. The only reason we've gotten this far is because of you. Because you forced this into public light in a way that couldn't be ignored. But sustaining that pressure? Making sure these survivors actually get help instead of just being processed back into the machinery? That's a longer fight. One I don't know if we can win. The confession sat heavy between them. Cale thought about the young girl on the cargo ship. The teenage boy whispering prayers in a language he didn't understand. All 43 people who'd escaped one nightmare only to face the uncertainty of systems designed for efficiency rather than healing. What can I do? He asked. Nothing from in here. But after sentencing, after you serve whatever time the judge gives you, you could help, really help. Not with money or influence, with truth, with testimony, with being willing to stand beside survivors and validate their experiences instead of treating them like problems to be solved. I'll do it. Will you? Because that means years of advocacy, years of fighting systems that don't want to change, years of being publicly associated with trafficking survivors in ways that'll make rebuilding your life difficult. It means choosing them over your comfort, every time, for as long as it takes. I said I'll do it. Agent Chen nodded slowly. All right, then maybe this wasn't all for nothing. She left. More weeks passed. Marcus visited once, looking thinner and older than Kyle remembered. He'd been released on bail pending his own trial, charged with lesser offenses given his tactical role rather than decision-making authority. How you holding up? He asked. Surviving, Kyle said. You? Same. My lawyer thinks I'll get 2 years, maybe less with cooperation credit. He paused. Was it worth it? You tell me. I've been watching the news. Lucien's PR campaign is working. Half the country thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're a terrorist. And the survivors we rescued? Most people forgot about them within a week. Just another story that got loud for a minute, then faded into background noise. Marcus leaned back in his chair. So I don't know if it was worth it. I don't know if anything actually changed except we all ended up in prison. Something changed, Kyle said quietly. What? Us. We changed. We stopped being people who looked away. We stopped choosing comfort over courage. And maybe that's all we can control. Maybe the rest,
whether the system actually reforms, whether Lucien goes to prison, whether those survivors get real help, maybe all of that is beyond us. But we made a choice that mattered, and I have to believe that counts for something. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You sound different, he finally said. How? Less angry, less desperate, like you've accepted something. Maybe I have. What? That punishment and honesty aren't the same thing. That prison is what I deserve for crimes I committed. But honesty, actually facing what I did, actually taking responsibility without excuses, that's what changes you. Prison just takes your time. Honesty takes your soul and gives you a chance to build something better from the wreckage. Marcus stood to leave. You're a better man than I thought, Kyle. I hope you survive whatever comes next. You too. They shook hands through the small opening in the visitation barrier. Then Marcus was gone. Sentencing day arrived with the same gray Seattle weather that had witnessed everything else. The courtroom was less crowded this time, just reporters, federal officials, a handful of people Kyle didn't recognize. Seraphine sat in the gallery again, having been sentenced the week before to time served plus probation given her status as both victim and participant. Their eyes met across the courtroom. She nodded once. He returned it. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Mr. Viro, she began, reading from documents that detailed every crime, every mitigating factor, every aggravating circumstance. You've pleaded guilty to serious federal offenses. You've cooperated extensively with investigators. You've provided evidence that has led to multiple arrests and indictments. But you've also committed acts of violence that resulted in deaths. You've violated maritime law in ways that created international incidents. And you've taken justice into your own hands in a manner that undermines the rule of law. She paused. However, in my 30 years on the bench, I've never encountered a case quite like this. A defendant who admits guilt without reservation, who cooperates without seeking deals or protections, who seems genuinely committed to accepting responsibility rather than minimizing consequences. The sentencing report indicates you've spent the past 90 days helping investigators build cases against a trafficking network that has operated with impunity for years. Multiple survivors have submitted letters describing how your actions, however illegal, saved their lives. The judge set the documents down. This court must balance justice with mercy, must consider both the crimes committed and the circumstances that led to them, must weigh punishment against rehabilitation. She looked directly at Kyle. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison. You'll serve a minimum of 42 months before being eligible for parole. During incarceration, you'll continue cooperating with federal investigators. Upon release, you'll serve 3 years supervised probation and perform 1,000 hours of community service specifically related to supporting trafficking survivors. 5 years. 42 months minimum. The number landed with finality. Do you have anything to say? The judge asked. Kale stood. Just that I accept the sentence, Your Honor, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to use whatever time I have left making amends for the harm I caused. The judge nodded. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down one final time. Guards approached to lead Kyle back to detention. As he turned, he looked at Seraphine one last time. She was crying, not from sadness or relief, but something more complicated, something that looked like closure and grief and hope existing simultaneously. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Kyle nodded. Then he was led away to begin serving time that would measure in years, but hopefully, eventually, lead somewhere that resembled redemption. Semik. Federal prison was exactly as brutal and boring as expected. Kale spent the first 6 months adjusting to rhythms that had nothing to do with empire building or wealth management. Wake at 5. Breakfast at 6. Work detail repairing furniture in the prison workshop. Lunch. More work. Dinner. Rec time. Lockdown at 9. Repeat daily until the routine became automatic. He kept his head down, avoided conflicts,
focused on cooperation with ongoing investigations that continued even from inside. Agent Chen visited monthly, updating him on progress. Lucien Drygor had been convicted on multiple counts: racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering. Not trafficking directly, but enough to put him away for 15 years. His lawyers were appealing, but the evidence from Kael's flash drive had been devastating. Ronan Valcrest remained free. His legal team had successfully argued he was a victim of rogue employees. The shell companies and offshore accounts traced back to subordinates who'd since been arrested and convicted. Valcrest himself walked away with reputation damaged, but freedom intact.
It's not justice, Agent Chen admitted,
but it's more than we've ever gotten before. Lucien's network is collapsing. Mid-level traffickers are cutting deals to avoid harsher sentences. The infrastructure you helped build and then helped destroy, it's gone. Not permanently. These operations always rebuild, but for now, this corridor is shut down. What about the survivors? Most are in long-term care programs, therapy, job training, legal advocacy. Some have been granted asylum. Others are fighting deportation. A few have disappeared back into systems we can't track. She paused. Seraphine visits them sometimes, speaks at advocacy events, tells her story. She's become a voice for people who usually don't get heard. How is she? Surviving. Building something new from the wreckage. Same as you. Agent Chen stood to leave. Keep cooperating, Kael. Keep testifying when they need you. Keep being honest about what you did and why. It matters more than you know. Months became years. Kael served his time with the same methodical determination he'd once applied to building empires. He testified in trials, provided depositions, helped investigators connect dots that led to more arrests and more convictions. The trafficking network that had once seemed invincible slowly crumbled under accumulated pressure. In his third year of incarceration, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from one of the survivors, a young woman named Mai who'd been on the cargo ship that night. She wrote in halting English about the life she was building now, about the job she'd found, about the apartment she was renting, about the therapy sessions that were slowly helping her process trauma that would never fully disappear. At the end, she wrote, "You are not good man. You help make the machine that hurt us, but you also break the machine. You choose to burn everything to save people you never met. I do not forgive you, but I thank you. Because of you, I breathe free air. Because of you, I have chanced to become person I was meant to be before they stole my life." That means something. Maybe not redemption, but something. Kael read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it inside the book he was reading. A memoir by another survivor who'd turned trauma into advocacy. More letters came. Not many. Not a flood. But enough to remind him that somewhere beyond these walls, people whose names he'd never known were rebuilding lives that had been systematically destroyed. And his choices, however imperfect, however late, had created space for that rebuilding to happen. Parole hearing came in his 42nd month. He sat before a panel of 3 officials who reviewed his case with bureaucratic efficiency. They asked about his crimes, his cooperation, his plans for life after release, his understanding of the harm he'd caused, and the responsibility he still carried. Kael answered honestly. No excuses, no minimizing, just acknowledgement that he'd spent 15 years causing harm and would spend however many years he had left trying to mitigate that harm through action rather than words. The panel deliberated for 20 minutes. Then they granted parole. "Mr. Vero," the chairwoman said, "you'll be released in 30 days. You'll serve 3 years supervised probation. You'll complete 1,000 hours of community service. You'll maintain employment. You'll attend mandated counseling. Any violation results in immediate return to custody. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we'll see you in 30 days, Goang." Release day came with the same gray Seattle weather that had become a recurring character in his story. Kael walked out of federal prison wearing donated clothes and carrying a small bag containing everything he owned: books, letters, documentation of the advocacy work he'd been planning from inside. Seraphine was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against an older sedan that had seen better years. "You came," Kael said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I didn't know what to think. Get in. We have work to do." They drove through Seattle in silence for a while, the city looking simultaneously familiar and foreign after 3.5 years of absence. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. The skyline still gleamed, the streets still teemed with people living ordinary lives. But something fundamental felt different, like the city had shifted slightly on its foundation in ways only visible to people who'd been away. "Where are we going?" Kyle asked. "Survivor Advocacy Center in Tacoma. They're hosting an event tonight. Panel discussion about systemic failures in trafficking prevention. They asked me to speak. Asked if you'd be willing to speak too." "About what?" "About complicity. About the architecture of harm. About how people in positions of power enable trafficking through indifference and calculated ignorance. About how choosing to finally face that truth can create change even when it destroys everything you built." She glanced at him. "Think you can handle that?" "I don't know, but I'll try." "Good, because trying is all anyone can ask for." They reached Tacoma as evening fell. The Advocacy Center occupied a renovated warehouse, same industrial architecture that had once housed trafficking operations, now repurposed for healing and resistance. Inside, maybe 50 people gathered: survivors, advocates, social workers, lawyers working on cases that would take years to resolve. Seraphine introduced him to the organizers. They were wary, skeptical. These were people who'd spent careers fighting systems that treated survivors as problems rather than human beings. Having someone who'd actively participated in those systems stand beside them required trust that hadn't been earned yet. "You speak last," one organizer said. "After survivors, after advocates, after people who actually did the work. You get 10 minutes, use them wisely." Kyle sat in the audience and listened to stories that cut deeper than any prison sentence. A woman described being trafficked at 14, described systems that repeatedly failed her, described the years it took to rebuild trust in human beings after that trust had been systematically destroyed. A man talked about losing his daughter to a network that operated with impunity because people in power chose not to see what was happening. An advocate detailed the policy failures and institutional barriers that made rescue and recovery nearly impossible, even when survivors found the courage to come forward. Each story added weight to understanding that could never be complete, but could at least be honest. Then they called his name. Kyle stood and walked to the small stage, feeling like he was approaching a confessional where absolution wasn't possible, but honesty was mandatory. He looked out at the faces watching him, people who had every reason to hate what he represented and no reason to believe anything he said. "My name is Kyle Viro," he began. 15 years ago, I helped build infrastructure that enabled human trafficking across the Pacific Northwest. I signed manifests that treated people like cargo. I authorized shipments I never questioned because asking questions meant looking too closely at what I was building. I chose wealth over humanity, chose comfort over courage, chose complicity over resistance. The room was silent. For 12 years after that, I convinced myself I'd changed, built a legitimate empire, donated to charities, told myself distance made me clean. But I hadn't changed. I'd just gotten better at lying to myself, better at looking away, better at building walls between who I was and who I pretended to be. He took a breath. 3.5 years ago, a survivor named Seraphine Vale walked back into my life and forced me to face what I'd spent 12 years avoiding. She asked me a simple question: had I actually changed, or was I just better at pretending? And I didn't have a good answer, because change requires more than distance, more than donation checks, more than building something new on top of buried bodies. Change requires honesty, requires facing exactly what you did and accepting responsibility without excuses. Kale looked directly at the survivors in the audience. "I can't undo the harm I caused. Can't give back the years that were stolen. Can't erase trauma that will never fully heal. What I did was monstrous, and saying I'm sorry feels inadequate to the point of insult. But I can be honest. I can acknowledge complicity. I can spend whatever time I have left working to dismantle systems I once helped build. Not because it earns forgiveness, not because it makes me good, but because it's the only response to profound harm that has any integrity." He paused. The people who rescued those survivors from the cargo ship that night weren't heroes. We were people who'd run out of excuses, who'd finally chosen truth over comfort, who'd accepted that doing the right thing would cost everything and did it anyway because the alternative was staying complicit. And if there's anything I've learned from this, it's that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and choosing honesty anyway, choosing accountability anyway, choosing resistance anyway. Masa. Kale's voice roughened. So I stand here tonight not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging what I did, accepting responsibility, and committing to whatever work survivors and advocates determine is useful. Because this isn't about me. It was never about me. It's about the 43 people we rescued that night, the hundreds more still trapped in systems that treat them as inventory, the thousands who survived and are rebuilding despite institutional failures, the advocates fighting battles that should never be necessary. You're the people who matter, and I'm just trying to figure out how to be useful to that fight instead of continuing to be an obstacle. He stepped away from the microphone. The applause was muted, uncertain. Not celebration, but acknowledgement that honesty had been offered, even if trust hadn't been earned. Afterward, people approached with questions and challenges. Kyle answered as honestly as he could, accepting criticism without deflection, acknowledging harm without minimizing it. The conversations were hard, uncomfortable, exactly what they needed to be. Seraphine found him near the end of the evening. "You did okay," she said. "Just okay?" "Better than okay would be dishonest. You're still learning, still figuring out how to be useful instead of just sorry, but you're trying. And that's more than most people in your position ever do." "Is it enough?" "No, but it's a start." They walked outside into rain that had started falling while they were inside. The warehouse district stretched dark and quiet around them, industrial buildings that held different purposes now but remembered their violent histories in foundations and architecture. "What happens next?" Kyle asked. "You keep showing up, keep working, keep being honest even when it's uncomfortable, keep choosing survivors over your comfort." Seraphine paused. "And you accept that this is lifelong work, that there's no finish line where you get declared redeemed and released from obligation, just years of fighting systems that don't want to change and supporting people whose trauma never fully disappears." "I can do that." "Can you?" "Because it's unglamorous, exhausting, often thankless, and you'll spend decades being reminded of the worst things you ever did by people who have every right to hate you." "I know." Seraphine studied his face for a long moment. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "Some things are too large to forgive. Too much of my life was shaped by what happened, by the machine you helped build, by the years I spent locked in basements while you signed manifests." "I know, but—" She paused. "I respect what you've become, not who you were, not the empire you built or the wealth you accumulated, but the person who finally chose truth over comfort, who chose to burn everything to save people you never met, who accepted consequences instead of running. That person is worth working beside." "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep being honest. And maybe 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you'll have become someone different enough that the distance actually means something." She turned and walked toward her car. Kyle stood in the rain, watching her drive away, feeling the weight of years stretching ahead. Years of advocacy and testimony and unglamorous work that would never fully balance the harm he'd caused, but might at least create space for healing he could never personally provide. His phone buzzed. A message from his parole officer reminding him of tomorrow's check-in. Another message from the Advocacy Center asking if he'd be willing to speak at another event next month. A third from Agent Chen asking for testimony in yet another trial spawned from investigations he'd helped initiate. The work continued, would always continue. Because trafficking networks didn't disappear just because one corridor collapsed. They rebuilt, adapted, found new routes and new methods, which meant the fight against them had to be equally persistent, equally adaptable, equally committed to the long haul. Kale pulled up his contacts and started making calls. First to a lawyer who helped survivors navigate asylum processes, then to a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery, then to 3 different advocacy organizations asking how he could be useful. The calls would lead to meetings, the meetings would lead to work, the work would lead to more work. An endless cycle of showing up and being useful and trying to create change in systems designed to resist it. But standing there in the rain outside a repurposed warehouse in Tacoma, Kyle Viro finally understood something about redemption that had eluded him for 15 years. It wasn't a destination. It wasn't something you achieved and then moved on from. It was a practice. A discipline, a choice made daily to value other people's healing over your own comfort, to value truth over reputation, to value accountability over excuses. Some people spent their whole lives running from that choice. Kale had spent 12 years running, but he was done running now, done hiding behind wealth and distance and carefully managed silence, done pretending that rebuilding something new on top of buried bodies made his hands clean. The rain fell harder, soaking through his donated jacket, turning Seattle into a blur of lights and shadows that would continue existing long after he was gone. And in that moment, standing between his past and whatever future he could build from the wreckage, Kyle finally made peace with a truth that was both terrible and liberating. Punishment could be survived. Forgiveness could be impossible. But honesty, real, unflinching, continuous honesty about what you'd done and what you owed, that changed you forever. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask for. Maybe that was what it actually meant to be human.